The crack of the whip split the frozen air like a rifle shot. Reed Maddox lowered his Spencer carbine, the deer in his sights momentarily forgotten as he peered through the scope toward the disturbance. His breath hung in white clouds against the January sky of 1884. Wyoming Territory, still a harsh mistress, even 15 years after he'd claimed his 160 acres under the Homestead Act. Through the rifle's sight, Reed watched the scene unfold near the old well that marked the boundary between his property and the Stanton estate. Clara Stanton, widow, churchgoer, and the coldest woman in 3 counties, stood over a small figure crumpled in the snow. The quirt in her gloved hand rose and fell again. A child's cry pierced the distance. Reed adjusted his scope. The girl couldn't be more than 12, thin as a reed herself, dressed in clothes too light for the bitter cold. Emma, that was her name. He'd seen her in town once or twice, always a step behind Clara, eyes downcast, shoulders hunched against invisible blows. Blood stained the snow around the fallen bucket. Clara's voice carried faintly on the wind. Useless, ungrateful wretch. Reed's finger hovered over the trigger. At 400 yards, he could end Clara Stanton's cruelty with a single shot. The thought passed through him like an old ghost, the same cold calculation that had kept him alive through the Wilderness Campaign and a dozen other bloodbaths during the war. Instead, he lowered his rifle. Killing Clara would only trade one evil for another. Justice and redemption, Wyoming wasn't found at the end of a gun barrel. Not anymore. Not since men like Hank Cooper had brought money and Eastern influence to what was once frontier justice. Reed watched until Clara dragged the girl back toward the grand house, leaving the spilled water to freeze in the snow. Only then did he shoulder his rifle and limp back toward his cabin, his old war wound aching with each step through the deep snow. The memory of the girl's silent acceptance haunted him. Not a scream, not a plea, just the mute endurance of someone who'd learned that crying only made the beating last longer. Reed's cabin stood starkly against the twilight, smoke curling from the stone chimney. It wasn't much, 2 rooms of solid pine logs, a covered porch, and a barn that housed his horse, 2 milk cows, and enough supplies to weather the harsh Wyoming winters. But it was his, earned through sweat and blood after he'd returned from the war with nothing but nightmares and a permanent limp. Inside, he hung his rifle on the pegs by the door and stoked the fire. The wound in his thigh, courtesy of a Confederate sharpshooter at the Battle of the Wilderness, throbbed with the coming snow. 20 years, and still it predicted the weather better than any barometer. He moved to the crude shelf that held his few personal possessions. A daguerreotype of Sarah, his wife, taken before the fever took her and their unborn child 4 years ago. A battered tin cup from his war days. And a small wooden box containing the personal effects of James Lark, a young private who died saving Reed's life in '64. "I promised you, James," he murmured, running a callous thumb over the box. "I promised I'd look after your family if you didn't make it back." It was a common pledge among soldiers. Most were forgotten in the chaos that followed. But Reed Maddox was a man whose word remained iron, even when the world around him had gone soft with compromise. He'd searched for James's widow when he returned from the war, only to discover Mary Lark had headed west with their young daughter. The trail had gone cold in Cheyenne. Reed had settled in redemption, hoping someday to fulfill his pledge. Then last spring he'd overheard a name in town, Emma Lark. The pieces had fallen together slowly. Mary had worked as a housekeeper for Nicholas Stanton, the banker. After Nicholas's suspicious death 2 years ago, Clara had kept Emma on. Not as a ward, but as something closer to property. Reed pulled on his coat again and gathered supplies, bandages, a small tin of ointment he used for his own wound, some jerky, and hardtack. The blizzard could wait. He had a debt to pay. The well stood at the edge of the Stanton property, a neutral ground of sorts where boundaries blurred. Reed approached cautiously after nightfall, when the windows of the grand house glowed with lamplight but revealed no silhouettes. He placed his offering on the stone edge of the well, food wrapped in clean cloth, medicine, and a small tin cup filled with still warm coffee. Then he melted back into the darkness, keeping watch from the shelter of a gnarled cottonwood tree. An hour passed before the back door of the house creaked open. A small figure slipped out, moving like a shadow across the snow. Emma approached the well warily, glancing back at the house with each step. When she discovered the bundle, She froze, scanning the darkness. Reed remained still. The girl's face, illuminated briefly by moonlight, showed no childish wonder, only the calculating wariness of a trapped animal assessing whether food was worth the risk of a snare. She took the medicine first, quickly tucking it into her threadbare dress. The food disappeared into a pocket. The coffee she drank in 3 desperate gulps, returning the cup to the well's edge with painful precision. Just as she turned to leave, Reed shifted his weight, his bad leg betraying him with a crack of a buried branch. Emma's head snapped toward the sound, eyes wide with terror. "It's all right," he called softly. "I won't hurt you." She bolted like a startled deer, fleeing back to the house that offered familiar danger over unknown kindness. Reed sighed, collecting the empty cup. It was a start. The next morning brought Sheriff Holden to Reed's door, snow crusting his heavy mustache and the brim of his hat. A once capable lawman gone to seed, Holden had maintained his position largely by knowing which battles to avoid. "Maddox," he nodded, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Cold enough to freeze the horns off a bull." "What brings you out in this weather, Sheriff?" Reed asked, pouring coffee for them both. Holden warmed his hands around the cup. "Had a visitor this morning. Clara Stanton seems to think someone's been trespassing near her property, leaving things by her well." His eyes, roomy but still sharp, studied Reed's face. "Wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "It's a free country," Reed replied evenly. "Or it was supposed to be." "Don't play philosopher with me, Reed. You know how things stand with the Stantons in this town. Nicholas may be dead, but Clara still holds enough notes to sink half the businesses in redemption." Reed leaned back in his chair. "Including yours?" Holden's face darkened. "Watch yourself. I'm here as a courtesy. Clara's got Hank Cooper's ear these days, and that man bears you no goodwill. Whatever you're planning regarding the Lark girl, I suggest you reconsider." "The Lark girl," Reed repeated slowly. "So you know who she is?" "Course I do. This is my town." "Then you know what happens in that house isn't right." Holden stood, setting down his half-finished coffee. "What I know is Nicholas Stanton died under circumstances nobody wanted examined too closely. What I know is Clara's been acting peculiar ever since. And what I know for certain is that Hank Cooper doesn't need much reason to come after you in that land of yours." He moved to the door. "Stay clear of Stanton property, Reed. Some ghosts are better left buried." After the sheriff left, Reed checked his rifle and ammunition. He'd never been good at leaving ghosts undisturbed. 3 days later, Reed returned from checking his fence line to find a knife embedded in his barn door. Not stuck casually, but driven deep into the wood with enough force to require a strong arm. A warning. He yanked it free, recognizing the bone handle and brass fittings, a knife carried by one of Cooper's men. The message was clear enough. That night, the temperature plunged. Wyoming winters took no prisoners, and this one seemed determined to set records. Reed added extra wood to the fire and checked his supplies. He had enough to last until spring, unless unexpected guests arrived. As if summoned by the thought, a pounding on his door roused him from sleep well past midnight. Hand on his revolver, Reed approached cautiously. "Who's there?" he called. "Please," came a voice so faint he almost missed it beneath the howling wind. "Please help." Reed flung open the door to find Emma Lark collapsed on his porch, her lips blue with cold, nightdress frozen to her skin. Blood matted her hair where a blow had fallen. "Sweet Jesus," he breathed, gathering her small form in his arms and kicking the door shut behind him. She weighed almost nothing, bones sharp beneath his hands as he laid her near the fire. Her skin was ice, her breathing shallow. Reed worked together quickly, wrapping her in blankets, heating water for tea laced with whiskey. "Emma," he said gently, lifting her head. "Emma, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on him with difficulty. "She locked me out," she whispered, "said I needed to learn gratitude." "Drink this," he urged, holding the cup to her cracked lips. "Slowly now." She obeyed, wincing at the burn of alcohol. "She'll kill me when she finds me gone." "She won't find you," Reed promised, though he knew the futility of such words. Redemption was too small for hiding. "And she won't hurt you again." Emma's laugh was a terrible sound from a child, hollow and ancient. "You don't know her." "I know enough." Reed checked the wound on her scalp. Nasty but not deep. "Why tonight, Emma? You've endured her for years. Why run now? Her eyes suddenly clear met his. Because you left medicine. Because you knew my name. She clutched the blanket tighter. And because she said she'd sell me to Mr. Cooper when I turned 13. Like she did with the other girl. Reed's blood went cold. What other girl? Ruth. She worked in the kitchen before me. When she got old enough, Mrs. Stanton said she was sold to cover a debt. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. I turned 13 next month. In that moment, Reed Maddox made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He checked his revolver, then reached for his rifle. Stay here, he told Emma, tucking the blankets around her. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. Understand? She nodded, eyes wide. I'm going to get your things. Then we're going to have a conversation with Sheriff Holden about exactly what kind of town redemption has become. The Stanton house loomed against the night sky, its windows dark except for a single lamp in what Reed knew must be Clara's bedroom. The grand white columns, meant to evoke some southern plantation fantasy in the middle of Wyoming, seemed grotesque in the moonlight. Reed approached from the rear, keeping to the shadows. The back door was locked, but a window to what appeared to be a pantry stood slightly ajar. He slipped inside, moving silently despite his bad leg. The house was quiet, save for the tick of a grandfather clock in the hallway. Reed followed Emma's directions to the small alcove behind the kitchen where she slept on a thin pallet. Her few possessions fit into a flour sack, a worn dress, a hairbrush missing half its bristles, and a small rag doll missing an arm. As Reed turned to leave, a floorboard creaked overhead. He froze, listening to footsteps cross the upper hall. Clara was awake. He pressed himself against the wall as the steps descended the main staircase. Through the kitchen doorway, he could see Clara's shadow preceding her into the hall, the hem of her robe sweeping the polished floor. Emma? She called, voice honey-sweet and venomous. Emma, dear, are you hiding from me? Reed's hand tightened on his rifle. One shot would end it. One shot, and he could claim self-defense when Holden came calling. Clara moved toward the kitchen, a oil lamp held high, casting distorted shadows across her sharp features. In the flickering light, Reed could see what others in town might miss, the fever-bright gleam in her eyes that spoke of something unbalanced. I know you're here, ungrateful child, she continued, voice hardening. Your punishment will only worsen with each minute you delay. She stepped into the kitchen and Reed made his decision. He emerged from the shadows, rifle leveled at her chest. The girl isn't here, Clara, he said quietly, and she won't be coming back. Clara Stanton didn't scream, didn't flinch. Her only reaction was a slight widening of those feverish eyes. Mr. Maddox, she said, as if they'd met at a social gathering. I don't recall inviting you into my home. I don't recall you having permission to beat a child within an inch of her life, he countered, or to sell girls to Hank Cooper. Something flickered across her face, not fear or shame, but calculation. Emma has been spinning tales again. The child is disturbed, has been since her mother's unfortunate accident. Accident? Reed took a step closer. Like your husband's accident? The lamp in Clara's hand trembled slightly. You should choose your words with greater care, Mr. Maddox. Slander is a serious matter. So is murder. Clara's smile was a terrible thing. You have no proof of anything, only the word of a disturbed orphan against a respected widow. Even if you take her, who do you think the town will believe? Who do you think Sheriff Holden will side with when I report a kidnapping? A man who has Hank Cooper's financial backing? Or a crippled war veteran living alone on a failing homestead? Reed felt the truth of her words like a physical blow. The law and redemption had been bought and paid for long ago, but he had one card left to play. Emma is James Lark's daughter, he said quietly. I served with her father. Before he died, I swore to protect his family. For the first time, uncertainty crossed Clara's face. The girl is my legal ward. Do you have papers to prove that? Because I have James Lark's effects, his letters about his wife and child. I have a soldier's oath. Reed stepped closer. You may own this town, Clara, but the territory governor still remembers what I did for him during the war. How far do you think your influence reaches? It was a bluff, but one Clara couldn't afford to call, not immediately. She stepped back, composing herself. Take the brat, she said finally. But this isn't over, Mr. Maddox. Not by a long measure. Reed backed toward the door, rifle still trained on Clara. One more thing. If I hear of any more girls being sold to Cooper or anyone else, I'll come back. And I won't be coming for a conversation. He slipped out into the night, the sack of Emma's meager possessions clutched in his free hand. The wind had picked up, driving ice crystals that stung his face as he made his way back across the field to his cabin. Emma had obeyed his instructions. The door was barred and opened only after he called her name. She looked at the small sack in his hands, her expression unreadable. "Is she coming?" she asked. "Not tonight," Reed answered honestly, "but she won't give up easily." Emma nodded as if this confirmed something she already knew. "What happens now?" Reed set his rifle down and stoked the fire. "Now we get some rest. Tomorrow we talk to Sheriff Holden. We make everything legal and above board." "She won't let that happen. She doesn't have a choice." Reed turned to face the girl, seeing for the first time how her eyes, green like her father's, held a wisdom no child should possess. "I made a promise to your father, Emma, a long time ago, before you were born." "My father?" For the first time, emotion cracked through her careful mask. "You knew my father?" Reed nodded, moving to retrieve the wooden box from its shelf. "His name was James Lark, Private, Union Army. He saved my life at the Battle of the Wilderness." He opened the box, removing a tarnished button and a folded letter. "He died so I could live, Emma. And before he did, I promised I'd look after his family if he didn't make it home." Emma took the button, turning it over in her small fingers. "My mother never spoke of him." "War leaves wounds that go deeper than flesh," Reed said quietly. "Some people can only survive by forgetting." The girl looked up at him, something unfamiliar dawning in her expression. Not quite trust, but its distant cousin, hope. "Will you keep your promise?" she asked. "I intend to try, Bara." The knock came just after dawn. Reed, who had slept in the chair to give Emma the bed, woke instantly, hand reaching for his rifle. "Maddox, open up!" Sheriff Holden's voice carried through the thick door. Reed glanced at Emma, who had shrunk back against the wall, eyes wide with terror. "It's all right," he told her, though he wasn't sure that was true. "Stay calm." He unbarred the door to find not just Holden, but Clara Stanton and two of Cooper's men waiting on his porch. Snow was falling again, dusting Clara's black cloak and hat like funeral ash. "Sheriff," Reed nodded, keeping his rifle visible but pointed downward. "Step aside, Reed," Holden said wearily. "Mrs. Stanton has reported the girl missing. Says she believes you've taken her." "I'm not missing," Emma's voice came from behind Reed, surprisingly strong. "I'm right here." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Come here, Emma. This foolishness has gone on long enough." Emma stepped forward to stand beside Reed, but made no move to obey Clara. Reed rested a protective hand on her shoulder. "The girl came to me last night, half frozen and bleeding," he told Holden. "Clara locked her out in a blizzard as punishment. You call that proper guardianship?" Holden shifted uncomfortably. "That's for a judge to decide. I'm just here to return the girl to her legal guardian." "And is Mrs. Stanton her legal guardian?" Reed pressed. "Does she have adoption papers? Any documentation at all?" "My late husband made all the necessary arrangements," Clara said smoothly. "Emma has been our ward since her mother's tragic passing." "That's a lie," Emma said, voice shaking. "She never adopted me. She made me work for my keep after my mother died. She said I was property, not family." Clara's smile was glacial. "The delusions of a troubled child. Her mother died in an accident at our home. Taking her in was an act of Christian charity my husband insisted upon." "Your husband had quite a few accidents around him," Reed observed. "His own included." Clara turned to Holden. "Sheriff, I won't stand here and be insulted. The girl's my legal responsibility. I demand you return her to my custody immediately." Holden looked pained. "Reed, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Reed's grip tightened on his rifle. "Emma isn't going anywhere with this woman. She's James Lark's daughter. I served with her father in the Union Army. I gave him my word I'd look after his family if anything happened to him." "A convenient story," Clara sneered. "I have his letters, his personal effects. I can prove who she is." Reed stared directly at Holden. "Can you prove Clara has any legal right to her at all?" The standoff stretched, tension crackling like the static before a storm, Finally, Holden sighed. Here's what's going to happen, he said. The girl stays here for now. Sheriff, Clara protested. Until we sort this out legally, Holden continued firmly. Judge Patterson will be through next week for circuit court. He can hear both claims and make a ruling. And if I refuse to wait, Clara asked coldly, then you can explain to the judge why you're so desperate to keep a child you claim is nothing but trouble. Holden's gaze hardened, and I'd be forced to open an inquiry into those accusations about selling girls, which I'm sure neither you nor Mr. Cooper want. Clara's face went rigid with fury. Very well, 1 week, but I'll hold you personally responsible, Sheriff, if any harm comes to my property in the meantime. Her eyes flicked to Emma. Any of my property. She turned and swept back to the waiting carriage, Cooper's men following like trained dogs. Holden watched them go, then turned back to Reed. You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Maddox. She was going to sell that child to Cooper, Reed said quietly, like merchandise. You can't prove that. Not yet, Reed's jaw set, but I will. Holden adjusted his hat, preparing to leave. 1 week, Reed. Keep the girl close, and watch your back. Clara Stanton isn't the only one you've made an enemy of today. As the sheriff rode away, Reed closed the door and turned to find Emma still standing where he'd left her, face pale but composed. Did you mean it? She asked. About my father? About your promise? Reed nodded, every word. Then I have a question, Emma said, her voice suddenly older than her years. If you promised to look after us, where were you when my mother died? The question hit like a physical blow. Reed had no answer that would satisfy either of them. I searched, he said finally. When I came back from the war, I looked for James's family. The trail went cold in Cheyenne. I didn't know you'd come to redemption until I heard your name in town last spring. He met her eyes directly. I failed you and your mother. I'm trying to make that right. Emma considered his words, then nodded once as if coming to a decision. Mrs. Stanton killed my mother, she said matter-of-factly. She pushed her down the stairs after they argued. I saw it happen. Nobody believed me. Reed felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Wyoming winter. We'll make them believe, he promised. We'll make them listen. Emma's smile was a ghost of what a child should be. No one has ever listened to me before. Then it's about time someone started. Reed held out his hand. Let's get you some proper breakfast. Then we need to prepare. We have 1 week to prove Clara Stanton is unfit to be anyone's guardian, and that I'm fit to be yours. Emma hesitated, then placed her small hand in his weathered palm. Do you think we can win? Reed thought of Clara's cold confidence, of Cooper's money and influence, of a town where justice had long been for sale. I think, he said carefully, that some fights are worth having even when the odds are against you. Emma nodded, a spark of her father's determination flickering in her eyes. Then we'll fight together. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering their tracks and the blood that had marked Emma's desperate journey through the night. But Reed knew some stains couldn't be so easily erased. Some debts demanded payment in full. And as he watched this small, fierce survivor begin to thaw in the warmth of his cabin, Reed Maddox silently renewed the promise he'd made to a dying soldier 20 years ago. This time, he wouldn't fail. The week before Judge Patterson's arrival brought bitter cold and something worse, uncertainty. Reed spent the mornings reinforcing the cabin against Wyoming's punishing winter, while afternoons were devoted to building Emma's case against Clara Stanton. The girl remained watchful, as if waiting for this fragile sanctuary to shatter. She spoke little, ate sparingly despite Reed's encouragement, and startled at unexpected sounds. Only at night, when nightmares drove her from sleep, did her carefully constructed walls crumble. On the third night, Reed found her huddled beside the dying fire, arms wrapped around herself, rocking slightly. Emma, he asked softly, careful not to approach too quickly. Another bad dream? She nodded, eyes fixed on the glowing embers. I saw my mother falling again, but this time she kept falling forever. Reed eased himself onto the floor beside her, his old wound protesting. Want to talk about it? Emma shook her head, then surprised him by asking, Did my father have nightmares after the battles? The question pierced him. Yes, Reed admitted. We all did. Some still do. How do you make them stop? Reed stoked the fire, buying time to consider his answer. You don't, not completely, but you learn to live alongside them. You build something stronger than the fear. Like what? Purpose, a reason to face each day. He glanced at her. Your father found his in letters from your mother. Every night, no matter how exhausted, he'd read her words by candlelight. Emma's fingers twisted in her nightdress. I don't remember him at all. He remembered you, Reed said. Carried your likeness everywhere. He hesitated, then added, James was the bravest man I ever knew, Emma. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because he acted despite his fear. She considered this, then asked, will Clara win? At the hearing? Not if I can help it. But what if she does? Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. She'll kill me for running. Or worse, she'll sell me to Cooper like she promised. Reed's jaw tightened. That won't happen. He reached slowly for the box on the mantel, removing James Lark's service revolver, cleaned and loaded. Tomorrow I'm going to teach you how to use this. Emma's eyes widened. I'm not strong enough. Oh, strength isn't about muscle, Reed said. It's about will. Your father knew that. I think you do too. Later, watching her finally drift back to sleep in the chair by the fire, Reed confronted the truth he'd been avoiding. If the legal battle failed, he was prepared to take Emma and flee the territory rather than return her to Clara's custody. The realization should have troubled him more than it did. Dawn broke clear and cold the next morning. After breakfast, during which Emma surprised him by asking for seconds, Reed led her to the barn where he'd set up targets along the back wall. First rule, he said, unloading the revolver and handing it to her. Every gun is loaded, even when it isn't. Never point it at anything you don't intend to shoot. Emma nodded solemnly, only holding the weapon awkwardly. Second rule, know what's behind your target. Reed adjusted her grip. And third, finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. For the next hour, he taught her stance, sight alignment, and trigger control. The revolver was heavy for her small hands, but she approached the task with the same grim determination she seemed to bring to everything. My hands are shaking, she admitted after her first attempt at dry firing. That's natural, Reed assured him. Even seasoned soldiers shake. The trick isn't to eliminate fear, but to work through it. He loaded a single round. Remember, squeeze, don't pull. Let the shot surprise you. Her first live round went wide, the recoil nearly causing her to drop the gun. But by the sixth attempt, she'd managed to hit the target. Not center, but respectable. Good, Reed nodded. That's enough for today. We'll practice again tomorrow. Emma carefully handed back the revolver. Will I have to shoot someone to stay free? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Reed chose his words carefully. I hope not, but in this world, it's better to have skills you never use than to need skills you never learned. As they walked back to the cabin, Emma asked, what else did my father know how to do? Besides fighting? Reed smiled slightly. James could track game better than any man in the regiment, could read sign that most would miss entirely. He glanced at the fresh snow around them. Want to learn that too? For the first time since her arrival, something close to eagerness flickered across Emma's face. Yes. The rest of the morning was spent following rabbit trails through the snow, Reed teaching her how to distinguish different animal tracks, how to determine direction and speed from the spacing and depth of prints. Look there, he pointed to a subtle disturbance in the snow. What do you see? Emma frowned in concentration. Footprints, but not animal. Human? Good. Now what can you tell about them? She studied the tracks. They're deep at the heel and wide set, which means a heavy man, walking, not running. Reed nodded, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather creeping up his spine. And heading where? Emma followed the direction of the tracks, her expression sobering. Toward the cabin, from the direction of town. When were they made? Last night. They've got fresh snow in them, but not filled. Very good. Reed kept his voice steady despite his growing unease. Now, can you see where they left? Emma circled the cabin, finding the departure trail, heading back toward town. Same person? Yes, which means someone was watching us, she concluded, eyes darting nervously toward the tree line. Reed rested a hand on her shoulder. That's right. And now we know, in war, information is often the difference between victory and defeat. Is this war? She asked quietly. Reed thought of Clara's cold fury. of Cooper's financial stranglehold on the town, of the knife driven into his barn door. Not yet, he said, but it's heading that way. The following day, Reed rode into redemption alone, leaving Emma with strict instructions to bar the door and use the rifle if necessary. He needed to gather information and allies before Judge Patterson's arrival, and some conversations weren't meant for a child's ears. Redemption had grown from a rough trading post to a proper town over the 15 years Reed had claimed his homestead. The promise of the railroad had brought Eastern money and ambition, transforming crude log structures into painted, clapboard storefronts. The Grand Hotel now dominated one end of Main Street, while Stanton Bank anchored the other, twin monuments to the town's aspirations. Reed tied his horse outside Wilson's medical office. The doctor had treated Reed's war wound over the years and was one of the few men in town not beholden to either Stanton or Cooper money. Dr. Adam Wilson looked up from his desk as Reed entered, his gaunt face creasing into a concerned frown. "Thought you might be paying me a visit. Word travels fast about your new house guest." "I need your help, Doc," Reed said without preamble. "Emma Lark is being abused by Clara Stanton. I need medical testimony to prove it." Wilson sighed, removing his spectacles. "I heard as much. Treated the girl twice last year for accidents. Broken arm once, then bruised ribs." He shook his head. "Clara claimed that she fell down the stairs both times." "And you believe that?" "Of course not," Wilson snapped. "I've been a doctor for 30 years. I know what defensive wounds look like." He shuffled through a drawer, extracting a thin folder. "I kept notes, though I doubted they'd ever see use. Clara has too much influence." "Judge Patterson arrives in 3 days," Reed said. "Will you testify?" Wilson hesitated. Patterson is a fair man, but Cooper isn't above intimidation. Last doctor who crossed him found his practice mysteriously burned to the ground. "I'm not asking you to be a hero, Doc, just to tell the truth." "The truth," Wilson barked a humorless laugh. "Been in short supply around here since Hank Cooper rolled into town," he sighed deeply. "But yes, I'll testify. That child deserves better than what she's gotten." Reed clasped his shoulder gratefully. "Thank you." His next stop was less promising. Sheriff Holden listened to Reed's account of Emma's treatment with a carefully neutral expression, offering neither commitment nor denial. "You understand my position, Reed," he said finally. "Cooper practically owns this town now. Clara's got half the church ladies convinced she's a saint for taking in that difficult child. And you've got, what, a soldier's promise and a box of mementos?" "I've got the truth," Reed insisted. "Truth doesn't always win in a courtroom." Holden leaned forward. "Look, I can maintain neutrality at the hearing, but that's all. Cooper's been asking questions about your land deed, your tax payments, anything he can use against you. Let him. My affairs are in order." "Are they?" Holden raised an eyebrow. "Because word is Nicholas Stanton was holding some notes on your property before he died. Notes that mysteriously vanished from the bank records." Reed frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Clara might have more cards to play than you realize." Holden stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "Watch yourself, Reed, and watch that girl. Clara's not one to surrender anything she considers hers." Reed's final stop was the small wooden church at the edge of town. Unlike the imposing brick Methodist church where Clara held court every Sunday, this humble structure served those on society's margins: laborers, freedmen, and the occasional reformed sinner. Reverend Benjamin Thomas was sweeping the church steps when Reed approached. A former slave who'd fought for the Union before finding his calling, Benjamin had a reputation for plain speaking and moral courage rare in redemption. "Brother Maddox," he greeted Reed, "the Lord moves in mysterious ways. I was just praying for guidance regarding young Emma Lark." "Then perhaps I'm the answer," Reed said, removing his hat. "I need your help, Reverend." Inside the simple church, Reed explained the situation. Benjamin listened without interruption, his weathered face grave. "Nicholas Stanton confided in me before his death," Benjamin said finally. "He feared his wife's mental state was deteriorating. Said she'd become obsessed with the Lark woman working in their household." Reed leaned forward. "Did he suspect Clara of foul play when Mary died?" "He never said as much directly, but he changed his will shortly before his own death, making provisions for Emma's care that didn't involve Clara." Benjamin shook his head. "Unfortunately, the new will vanished after Nicholas's accident. The original will left everything to Clara with no mention of the child." "Convenient," Reed observed darkly. Indeed. Benjamin studied Reed carefully. Are you prepared for what helping this child might cost you? Cooper has been trying to consolidate the land along the proposed railroad route for years. Your homestead is one of the few properties he hasn't managed to acquire. I'm aware. And yet you still took in the girl. Benjamin's expression softened. That speaks well of you, Brother Maddox. I made a promise, Reed said simply, to the father. Benjamin nodded, but perhaps also to yourself. Reed shifted uncomfortably. Will you speak at the hearing? Your testimony about Nicholas's concerns could be crucial. I will speak the truth as I know it, Benjamin promised, though doing so may cost me my congregation. Clara has already convinced the church board to review my position due to my radical sympathies. I'm sorry to bring trouble to your door. Benjamin waved away the apology. Trouble finds those who stand for what's right, Brother Maddox. It's how we respond that matters. He reached for his Bible. Now let us pray for wisdom and protection in the days ahead. Reed wasn't a praying man, not since the war had shown him the depths of human cruelty, but he bowed his head respectfully, hoping that whatever God Benjamin served was listening. The day before Reed's planned return to town, a visitor arrived at the cabin. Emma spotted the approaching rider first, her newfound tracking skills serving her well. Someone's coming, she said, tensing visibly. Just one person, on horseback. Reed checked his revolver. Get inside. Use the signal we practiced if there's trouble. Emma nodded and retreated to the cabin, but Reed knew she'd be watching through the window, rifle ready. The rider approached slowly, hands visible on the reins, a deliberate gesture of peace. As he drew closer, Reed recognized Saul Blackwolf, a half-Shoshone trapper who occasionally traded in redemption. They'd served together briefly during the war, Saul as a scout for the Union Army. Maddox, Saul greeted him, dismounting with the fluid grace that belied his 60-some years. Heard you might need an extra pair of eyes. Reed clasped his friend's hand. News travels fast. Not news, signs. Saul nodded toward the forest edge. Cooper's men have been watching your place. 3 different camps in the last 2 days. I know, I've spotted 2 of them. Third is northeast, near the old lightning-struck pine. Saul's dark eyes narrowed. They're waiting for something. Judge Patterson arrives tomorrow. Reed gestured toward the cabin. Come inside, there's someone you should meet. Inside, Emma stood rigidly by the fireplace, rifle lowered but ready. Her eyes darted between Reed and the stranger. Emma, this is Saul Blackwolf. He served with me in the war, and he's one of the few men I trust with my life. Reed turned to his friend. Saul, this is Emma Lark, James's daughter. Recognition flashed in Saul's eyes. Little Hawk's child. Emma frowned. Little Hawk? Your father's name among the scouts, Saul explained, for his sharp eyes and quiet steps. He studied her face. You have his look about you. Something shifted in Emma's expression. Pride, perhaps, or the simple relief of connection to the father she'd never known. Over coffee, Reed explained the situation and their preparations for the hearing. Saul listened silently, his weathered face revealing nothing. Clara Stanton is dangerous, he said finally. More than you know. How so? Reed asked. Before she was Clara Stanton, she was Clara Wilkes of Pennsylvania, daughter of a wealthy family who sent her west after a scandal. Saul's voice was matter-of-fact. The scandal was the mysterious death of her young stepbrother, a fall that broke his neck. Emma's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the cabin. How do you know this? Reed demanded. I trade more than furs, Saul said simply. Information has value too. Nicholas Stanton paid me to investigate his wife's past shortly before his death. He produced a folded paper from his jacket. This is a copy of the report I gave him. The original disappeared along with the Nicholas. Reed scanned the document, a cold weight settling in his stomach. Clara's history revealed a pattern. Deaths by accident following conflicts, positions secured through marriages to increasingly influential men, each husband meeting an untimely end. She's killed before, Emma whispered. Many times. Yes, Saul confirmed, and she will kill again if threatened. Reed passed the paper back. Will you testify to this at the hearing? Saul's expression grew troubled. My word carries little weight in a white man's court, but I will try. That night, after Emma had finally fallen asleep, Reed and Saul sat by the fire discussing strategy. The hearing suddenly seemed more dangerous than Reed had anticipated. Not just a legal battle, but potentially a matter of life and death. Cooper's men are planning something, Saul said quietly. Too much movement, too many whispers. An ambush? Reed asked. Perhaps. Or something at the hearing itself. Saul stared into the flames. You should consider leaving, taking the girl and heading west. Reed had considered it. The territories were vast. A man and child could disappear into them, build a new life beyond Clara's reach. But running meant abandoning his homestead, the land he'd sweated and bled for, and any hope of justice for Mary Lark's murder. No, he decided. We face this directly. Emma deserves her day in court. Saul nodded, unsurprised. Then we prepare for battle. He reached for his pack, extracting a small leather pouch. Shoshone medicine, for protection. Reed accepted the token with appropriate gravity. He might not believe in Saul's medicine, but he respected the intention behind it. Get some rest, Saul advised. I'll take first watch. Reed checked on Emma once more before stretching out on his bedroll. She slept fitfully, one hand curled around her father's button beneath her pillow. Tomorrow they would ride into Redemption to face Judge Patterson, and whatever trap Clara and Cooper had laid for them. Reed's last thought before sleep claimed him was that he should have taught Emma more about survival in these past few days. He had a sinking feeling she would need every skill he could impart. They departed at first light, Saul scouting ahead while Reed and Emma followed on horseback. Emma rode her own mount now, a gentle mare Reed had been training. The girl sat straight in the saddle, her face set in determination despite the shadows under her eyes. Remember, Reed told her as they neared town, speak only the truth in court. Don't embellish or exaggerate. Just tell Judge Patterson exactly what you experienced. Emma nodded. And if he doesn't believe me? He's a fair man. He'll listen. Clara can be very convincing, Emma warned. She made the women at church believe I was disturbed, prone to lying and self-harm. That's why no one questioned the bruises. Reed's jaw tightened. We have Dr. Wilson's testimony and Reverend Benjamin's, and Saul's evidence about Clara's past. Will it be enough? Before Reed could answer, Saul reappeared from the tree line, his expression urgent. Riders, he said tersely, coming fast from town, armed. Reed immediately assessed their options. They were too far from the cabin to return, too exposed on the road to make a stand. How many? 5, Cooper's men. Reed made his decision. Emma, ride with Saul. He knows the back trails. He'll get you safely to Reverend Benjamin's church. He handed her James's revolver. Remember what I taught you. What about you? Fear cracked through her composure. I'll draw them off, meet them head on. Reed checked his rifle. Safer to split up. They want me more than you. No, Emma protested. We stay together. This isn't a discussion. Reed's voice brooked no argument. Go with Saul. Now. Saul moved his horse alongside Emma's. He's right, child. This is strategy, not abandonment. Tears filled Emma's eyes, the first Reed had seen from her. You promised, she whispered. You promised you'd protect me. And I am, Reed assured her, by making sure you reach town safely. He nodded to Saul. Go. With visible reluctance, Emma allowed Saul to lead her off the main road and into the cover of the trees. Reed watched them disappear, then turned his horse to face the approaching riders. They appeared over the rise moments later. 5 men on lathered horses, rifles ready. Reed recognized Cooper's foreman, Jackson, in the lead. Maddox, Jackson called, reining in 20 yards away. Where's the girl? Safe, Reed answered calmly, keeping his rifle across his saddle. What's your business here, Jackson? Mrs. Stanton sent us to escort her ward into town. Jackson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Judge Patterson's already arrived. Hearing's been moved up. Convenient timing, Reed observed. And if I don't believe your story. Jackson's hand moved closer to his holster. Don't make this difficult, Maddox. The girl belongs with her legal guardian. That's for the judge to decide. Reed kept his voice steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs. I'll bring Emma to town myself. That wasn't a request. Jackson nodded to his men, who spread out in a half circle. Mrs. Stanton was quite specific. We're to bring the girl back, with or without you. Reed weighed his options. 5 against 1 were poor odds, but he'd faced worse during the war. and every minute he delayed gave Saul and Emma more time to reach the safety of town. "I don't want trouble, Jackson," he said, slowly raising his hands. "But I'm not turning Emma over to you." "Then trouble's what you'll get." Jackson drew his revolver. "Last chance, Maddox. Where is she?" Reed's answer was to slam his heels into his horse's flanks, charging directly at the surprised men. His sudden movement threw off Jackson's aim, the shot going wide as Reed barreled past, firing his own revolver at the nearest rider. The man fell with a cry, and Reed kept going, bending low over his horse's neck as bullets whistled past. He veered off the road into the trees, drawing the pursuit away from Emma's route to town. A sharp pain bloomed in his shoulder, a bullet graze, not serious but painful. Reed pushed on, navigating the familiar terrain with the instincts of a man who'd spent 15 years working this land. Behind him, Jackson shouted orders as the men split up to flank him. Reed knew he couldn't outrun them forever. He needed to even the odds. Spotting a rocky outcropping ahead, Reed made his decision. He urged his horse toward it, then dismounted quickly, slapping the animal's rump to send it running onward as a decoy. Ignoring the pain in his shoulder and leg, he scrambled up the rocks to establish a defensive position. The first rider appeared moments later, following the horse's trail. Reed took careful aim and fired. The man jerked in the saddle, then tumbled to the ground. 2 down, 3 to go. Jackson wasn't fooled by the decoy. He approached more cautiously, using the trees for cover. "Give it up, Maddox," he called. "Even if you kill all of us, Cooper will just send more." Reed didn't waste breath responding. He scanned the forest, spotting movement to his left, the third rider trying to circle behind him. Reed fired twice, forcing the man back into cover. The standoff continued for several tense minutes. Reed conserved his ammunition, firing only when he had a clear shot. His shoulder throbbed, blood soaking his shirt. Then a new sound reached him. Hoofbeats approaching from the direction of town. Reinforcements for Jackson, or something else? Reed risked a glance and felt a surge of both relief and dismay. Sheriff Holden was approaching with 3 deputies, rifles ready. "What in God's name is happening here?" Holden demanded, taking in the scene. "Maddox ambushed us, Sheriff," Jackson called. "Shot 2 of my men." "That's a damn lie," Reed shouted back. "They came to take Emma by force. Said the hearing had been moved up." Holden's expression darkened. "No hearing's been moved, but Judge Patterson only just arrived." He turned to Jackson. "Lower your weapons, now." For a moment, Reed thought Jackson might refuse. Then reluctantly, he signaled his remaining men to stand down. "This isn't over, Maddox," Jackson warned as he backed away. "Indeed it isn't," Holden agreed grimly. "There'll be inquiries about this little ambush. Now clear out, all of you. Report back to Cooper that his plan failed." Once Jackson and his men had departed, Reed climbed down from his position, wincing as pain shot through his wounded shoulder. "You're hit," Holden observed. "It's nothing." Reed glanced anxiously down the road. "Emma and Saul Blackwolf were heading to Reverend Benjamin's church. I need to find them." "They're already there," Holden assured him. "Saul got word to me about the ambush. That's why I came looking for you." He shook his head. "Cooper's getting desperate if he's willing to risk murder on a public road." "It's not Cooper I'm worried about," Reed said, mounting one of the deputy's spare horses. "Clara Stanton is the real danger." Holden's expression was troubled. "You may be right. Let's get you to the doctor, then to the church. The hearing starts in 2 hours, and after this, I'd say you've got some compelling new evidence to present." As they rode toward town, Reed's mind raced with implications. Cooper's ambush had failed, but it suggested a new level of desperation. What else might Clara attempt before the hearing? And was Emma truly safe, even under Reverend Benjamin's protection? The game had changed, becoming more dangerous than Reed had anticipated. But one thing was certain. He wouldn't back down now. Not with Emma's future, and perhaps her very life at stake. They crested the final hill overlooking Redemption, the town's buildings stark against the snow. Somewhere below, Clara Stanton was preparing her case, unaware that her hired guns had failed. Reed checked his revolver, ensuring it was fully loaded. The real battle was just beginning. Dr. Wilson's office smelled of carbolic acid and ether as he examined Reed's wound. "You're lucky," he muttered, cleaning the bloody furrow across Reed's shoulder. "Half an inch deeper, and we'd be digging out lead." Reed winced as the doctor applied stinging antiseptic. "How's Emma?" Safe at Benjamin's church, last I heard. Saul's with her. Wilson tied off a neat bandage. You realize what this means, don't you? Cooper and Clara are desperate enough to attempt murder in broad daylight. It was an ambush, not an execution, Reed corrected, though the distinction felt academic. They wanted Emma, and they were willing to kill you to get her. Wilson handed Reed a clean shirt. The hearing's in an hour, you should know. Coopers have been busy this morning. Judge Patterson was met at the station by a welcoming committee. He's staying at the Grand Hotel, courtesy of our leading citizen. Buying influence. Attempting to, Wilson agreed. Patterson has a reputation for incorruptibility, but he's only human. He hesitated. There's something else. Clara's brought in a doctor from Cheyenne, specialist in mental disorders. Word is he'll testify that Emma suffers from delusional tendencies. Reed buttoned the shirt carefully over his bandaged shoulder. Convenient diagnosis. Very, especially since he's never examined the child. Wilson's thin face hardened. I've prepared my notes on Emma's injuries. They tell a different story, one of systematic abuse. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sheriff Holden entered, his expression grave. Reverend Benjamin's church was attacked, he announced without preamble. Firebombed through the window about 20 minutes ago. Reed's blood ran cold. Emma is safe, Holden assured him quickly. They'd already moved her to a different location. Saul suspected something might happen. Benjamin? Minor burns, nothing serious. His congregation is putting out the fire now. Holden's weathered face was troubled. This is escalating beyond anything I've seen in Redemption before. Even Cooper usually maintains some pretense of legality. It's not Cooper driving this, Reed said, rising carefully. It's Clara. She can't afford to let Emma testify. Holden nodded grimly. I'm posting deputies at the courthouse. No weapons allowed inside except for my men. He fixed Reed with a stern gaze. That includes you, Maddox. I can't have a shooting in my courtroom. I understand. Do you? Holden challenged. Because I've known you 15 years, and I've never seen that look in your eyes before. Not even when Sarah died. Reed didn't respond. The cold calculation that had served him in war had returned, a detached precision that measured threats and responses without emotion. Emma's safety was all that mattered now. I'll see you at the courthouse, he said finally. I need to check on Emma first. Reed, Holden's voice stopped him at the door. Whatever happens today, this town won't be the same afterward. Make sure you can live with the consequences. It was both warning and absolution. Reed nodded once, then stepped out into the bitter Wyoming morning. Saul had moved Emma to the small cabin behind Wilson's office, a place normally used to quarantine infectious patients, but empty now in the dead of winter. The scout met Reed outside, rifle in hand. 3 watchers, Saul reported quietly, 1 on the hotel roof, 2 circling the block. Cooper's men. Any sign of Jackson or his remaining riders? Not yet. They'll be licking their wounds. Saul's dark eyes studied Reed. You're hit. Grazed, nothing serious. Reed glanced at the cabin. How's Emma? Frightened but steady. Your little hawk's daughter has a warrior's heart. Reed entered the cabin to find Emma sitting rigidly on a narrow cot, James's revolver clutched in her lap. She looked up as the door opened, relief flooding her face when she recognized him. You came back, she said, voice cracking slightly. I promised I would. Reed sat beside her, careful not to make any sudden movements. The revolver in her hands wasn't aimed at him, but her finger was too close to the trigger for comfort. How are you holding up? I heard about the church. Her eyes were hollow with fatigue and fear. Reverend Benjamin could have died. Because of me. Because of Clara, Reed corrected firmly. None of this is your fault, Emma. She won't stop. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. Not until I'm dead or back under her control. That won't happen. Reed gently covered her hand with his, easing the revolver from her grip. The hearing is in less than an hour. Judge Patterson will hear the evidence, including Cooper's attempt to ambush us. What if he doesn't believe us? What if Clara convinces him I'm crazy, like she's told everyone else? The fear in her voice pierced him. This child had endured so much already. Abuse, the murder of her mother, years of captivity disguised as charity. Now she faced the terrifying prospect that even the law might fail to protect her. Reed made a decision in that moment that he knew might cost him everything. His freedom, possibly his life. Listen carefully, Emma, he said, keeping his voice low. No matter what happens at the hearing today, you won't go back to Clara. I promise you that. She frowned, not understanding. But if the judge rules, if the worst happens, Reed continued, Saul will take you west. He knows places where Clara and Cooper would never find you. You'd be safe. Without you? Fear sharpened her voice. I'd follow when I could. It was a half-truth. If he defied a court order, helped Emma escape, he'd likely face imprisonment, if Cooper's men didn't kill him first. But her safety mattered more than his future. Emma studied his face with a perception beyond her years. You're lying, she said flatly. You'd stay behind to face them, to draw them away from me. Sometimes Reed forgot she was James Lark's daughter, a man who could read sign where others saw only wilderness, who could sense deception in the most practiced liars. Your father was the same way, he said, changing tactics. Couldn't fool him either. Tell me about him, Emma requested suddenly. One more story, before we go. Reed recognized it for what it was, not just curiosity, but a need for connection, for something to hold on to in the coming storm. He thought for a moment, then nodded. The night before Wilderness, we were all on edge. The fighting had been brutal for days. Your father pulled out a letter from your mother, the last one he received. Inside was a drawing you had made. Reed smiled at the memory. Just a child's scribble, but James acted like it was a masterpiece. Showed it to every man in the company. What was the drawing of? Emma asked, leaning forward. A family, 3 stick figures holding hands. That's Mary, he'd say, pointing to the tallest one. That's me, pointing to the middle one. And that's my Emma, pointing to the smallest. Reed's throat tightened. He carried that drawing into battle the next day, said it reminded him what he was fighting for. Emma's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I don't remember drawing it. You were very young. Reed hesitated, then removed a small object from his pocket, a tarnished locket. Your father was carrying this when he died. I've been saving it for when you were ready. Emma took the locket with trembling fingers, carefully opening the clasp. Inside was a tiny portrait of a woman with Emma's same grave eyes and determined chin. My mother, she breathed. Yes, and on the other side, Emma turned the locket to reveal a lock of baby-fine hair tied with thread. Yours, Reed confirmed. James said Mary sent it to him just after you were born, said it was the closest he could come to holding you until the war ended. A single tear slipped down Emma's cheek. The first Reed had seen her shed. She clutched the locket tightly, then slipped it over her head, tucking it beneath her dress. Thank you, she whispered. A soft knock on the door signaled Saul's return. Time, he said simply. Emma squared her shoulders, wiping away the tear with a quick, almost angry gesture. I'm ready. Reed studied her, this child forced to grow up too quickly, now facing the people who had tormented her, with only his word and a few allies standing between her and continued abuse. Remember, he told her, speak only the truth. Look Judge Patterson in the eye. And no matter what Clara or her doctor say about you, keep your composure. Can you do that? Emma nodded once, her jaw set in a determination that reminded him painfully of James. For my mother, she said, and for my father. The Redemption Courthouse had begun life as a trading post before the town grew around it. Its rough-hewn logs had been covered with whitewashed clapboard, but the interior retained a frontier severity. Hard benches, plain walls, and windows too small to admit much of the winter light. By the time Reed, Emma, and Saul arrived, the room was already crowded. It seemed half the town had turned out for the hearing, divided clearly by allegiance. The front benches held Clara's supporters, church ladies in their Sunday best, Cooper's business associates, and the town's more prosperous citizens. The rear benches and standing room were filled with laborers, small farmers, and those who had felt Cooper's financial grip tightening around their lives. Clara Stanton sat at the front, dressed in mourning black as always, a lace veil partially obscuring her face. Beside her sat Hank Cooper, a bull of a man with a carefully groomed beard and expensive Eastern suit that couldn't quite disguise his rough origins. His eyes tracked Reed with predatory calculation. Dr. Wilson and Reverend Benjamin had saved seats for them, and Benjamin's hands were bandaged from the fire, but he nodded encouragingly as they joined him. Sheriff's men searched everyone for weapons, he murmured. Coopers are not happy about it. Judge Henry Patterson entered from a side door, a tall, austere figure with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes that had seen 30 years of frontier justice. He took his seat at the bench without ceremony. "This court is now in session," he announced, voice carrying easily through the room. "We are here to determine guardianship of the minor child, Emma Lark." He surveyed the crowded room with evident displeasure. "I understand emotions are running high, but I expect decorum. Any disruptions will result in immediate removal from my courtroom." His gaze settled on Emma. "Young lady, are you Emma Lark?" Emma stood, pale but composed. "Yes, Your Honor." "How old are you, Miss Lark?" 12, sir. 13 next month." Patterson nodded. "You understand the purpose of today's hearing?" "Yes, sir. To decide if I stay with Mr. Maddox or return to Mrs. Stanton." "That's correct." Patterson turned his attention to Reed. "Mr. Maddox, you currently have physical custody of the child. On what basis do you claim guardianship rights?" Reed stood, meeting the judge's gaze directly. "Emma is the daughter of Private James Lark, who served under my command during the war between the states. Before he died, saving my life at the Battle of the Wilderness, I promised to look after his family if anything happened to him. I've been searching for them since the war ended. And you believe this promise creates a legal claim to guardianship?" "I believe it creates a moral obligation, Your Honor. The legal claim comes from the documented abuse Emma suffered under Clara Stanton's care, and from Mrs. Stanton's lack of any formal guardianship papers." Patterson made a note, then turned to Clara. "Mrs. Stanton, you claim Emma is your legal ward. What documentation do you have to support this claim?" Clara rose gracefully, lifting her veil. "Your Honor, my late husband, Nicholas, and I took Emma in after her mother's tragic accident. Mary Lark was in our employ as a housekeeper. When she died, we assumed a responsibility for her orphan child as a Christian duty." She produced a folded document. "This letter, signed by the local pastor at the time, confirms our decision to act as Emma's guardians." The judge examined the letter, then frowned. "This is not a legal guardianship document, Mrs. Stanton. It's merely a statement of intent." "We were told it was sufficient, Your Honor," Clara replied smoothly. "In any case, we have provided for Emma for over 3 years now. She has been treated as a member of our household." "That's a lie," Emma blurted out, then quickly added, "Your Honor." Judge Patterson raised an eyebrow. "You'll have your chance to speak, Miss Lark. For now, please remain silent unless addressed directly." He turned back to Clara. "Mrs. Stanton, do you have any formal adoption papers or court-approved guardianship documents?" Clara's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "No, Your Honor. Such formalities seemed unnecessary given the circumstances." "I see." Patterson made another note. "Mr. Maddox, you've alleged abuse of the child under Mrs. Stanton's care. Do you have evidence to support this claim?" Reed nodded to Dr. Wilson, who approached the bench with his medical records. "Dr. Adam Wilson has documented Emma's injuries over the past 3 years." Wilson presented his notes methodically, describing broken bones, contusions, and other injuries inconsistent with normal childhood accidents. He concluded by stating, "In my professional opinion, these injuries indicate a pattern of physical abuse." Clara's lawyer, a slick-haired man named Morris, immediately objected. "Dr. Wilson is hardly an expert on childhood development or psychology, Your Honor. We have a specialist from Cheyenne who will testify that Emma's injuries are consistent with self-harming behaviors common in disturbed children." The specialist, Dr. Garrett, was called next. He had never examined Emma but offered a detailed theory about her delusional tendencies and pathological lying based solely on Clara's accounts. Throughout this testimony, Reed watched Emma's face. She maintained remarkable composure, though her knuckles whitened as she gripped the bench. When it was Reverend Benjamin's turn, he spoke of Nicholas Stanton's concerns about his wife's mental stability and the missing will that had made provisions for Emma's care. "Objection!" Morris shouted. "This is hearsay from a deceased individual who cannot confirm or deny these claims." "Sustained," Patterson ruled. "Unless you have the will in question, Reverend, this testimony is speculative." Benjamin looked stricken. "The will disappeared after Nicholas's death, Your Honor." Cooper's smug smile from the front bench confirmed what Reed had suspected. The will had been deliberately destroyed. The morning dragged on with testimony from townspeople supporting both sides. Clara's witnesses described Emma as troubled and difficult. Cooper testified about Reed's unstable behavior since his return from the war and his unhealthy obsession with the Lark family. Finally, Judge Patterson called Emma herself. She walked to the witness chair with her back straight, though Reed could see the fear in her eyes. "Miss Lark," Patterson began gently, "I'd like you to tell me in your own words about living with Mrs. Stanton." Emma took a deep breath. "Mrs. Stanton made me sleep in a storage room behind the kitchen. I wasn't allowed to eat with the family. I had to work from dawn until night, cleaning, carrying water, tending fires." Her voice remained steady. "If I made mistakes, she beat me with a quirt or locked me outside, even in winter." "Did you ever tell anyone about this treatment?" "I tried. The previous pastor, a teacher, some ladies from church." Emma's expression hardened. "They said I was making it up, that Mrs. Stanton was a respectable widow who had taken in an ungrateful orphan." "And what about your mother's death? You were present when this occurred?" Emma nodded. "Yes, sir. My mother and Mrs. Stanton were arguing about something. Papers, I think. Mrs. Stanton pushed her down the stairs. I saw it happen. When I tried to tell Mr. Stanton, Mrs. Stanton said I was confused, that my mother had tripped." Clara stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. The child is clearly disturbed, just as Dr. Garrett testified." "Miss Stanton, resume your seat," Patterson ordered sharply. "You'll have an opportunity to respond." Clara subsided, but her eyes burned with hatred as she stared at Emma. "Miss Lark, how would you describe your time with Mr. Maddox?" Patterson continued. "He gave me a real bed," Emma said simply. "He makes sure I eat enough. He doesn't hit me or lock me out." She hesitated, then added, "He teaches me things, how to track animals, how to ride, how to read better. He tells me about my father." "And you wish to remain with him?" "Yes, sir." Emma's voice grew stronger. "Mrs. Stanton said she was going to sell me to Mr. Cooper when I turned 13, like she did with Ruth, who worked for her before me." A shocked murmur ran through the courtroom. Cooper's face darkened dangerously. "That's a damnable lie," Clara cried. "The child is delusional." "Order!" Patterson banged his gavel. "Mrs. Stanton, control yourself or I'll have you removed." Reed watched the judge's expression carefully. Patterson seemed disturbed by Emma's testimony, but not entirely convinced. The case was balanced on a knife's edge. It was then that Saul Blackwolf rose. "Your Honor, I have evidence relevant to this case." Patterson frowned. "Your name, sir?" "Saul Blackwolf. I was a scout for the Union Army, served with Captain Maddox and Private Lark." Saul approached the bench, producing the report on Clara's past. "I was hired by Nicholas Stanton to investigate his wife's background shortly before his death." Clara went deathly pale as Saul explained his findings: the pattern of suspicious deaths, the institutionalization in Pennsylvania, the string of convenient marriages. Cooper was whispering frantically to Morris, who stood to object. "Your Honor, this so-called evidence is nothing but frontier gossip and insinuation from an unreliable source." Patterson's eyes narrowed. "I'll determine what constitutes evidence in my courtroom, Counselor." He examined Saul's report, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "Mrs. Stanton, are you aware of these allegations regarding your past?" Clara had recovered her composure. "Malicious fabrications, Your Honor. My husband was prone to paranoid suspicions near the end of his life. He imagined conspiracies where none existed. Yet the timing of his death, coming shortly after commissioning this investigation, seems coincidental," Patterson observed. "Many things in life are coincidental, Your Honor," Clara replied coldly. "That doesn't make them sinister." Patterson studied both sides for a long moment, then sighed. "This case presents troubling contradictions. The court will take a 1-hour recess while I review the evidence. We will reconvene at 2 o'clock for my ruling." As the crowd dispersed, Reed noticed Cooper slip out a side door, followed by several of his men. Clara remained seated, still as a statue, her eyes fixed on Emma with predatory intensity. "We should get Emma somewhere safe during the recess," Reed murmured to Saul. "Agreed. The mood is turning." Saul nodded toward a group of Cooper's supporters congregating near the entrance. Too many angry faces. They escorted Emma to Wilson's office, accompanied by one of Holden's deputies. The girl was exhausted but determined, her face set in the same stubborn lines Reed had seen in James during the war. "You did well," he told her. Judge Patterson was listening. Clara looked like she wanted to kill me, Emma observed quietly. She won't get the chance, Reed assured him, though he shared her concern. Something about Clara's focused hatred had unsettled him deeply. It wasn't the rage of someone who feared losing a legal battle, but the cold calculation of a predator denied its prey. Dr. Wilson provided a simple lunch, though none of them had much appetite. The hour passed in tense silence, broken only by the distant church bell marking the approach of 2 o'clock. As they prepared to return to the courthouse, the deputy assigned to them burst through the door, his face pale. "There's trouble," he announced. "Cooper's men are gathering at the saloon. They're armed." "The sheriff ordered no weapons in the courthouse," Reed reminded him. "They're not planning to enter the courthouse," the deputy said grimly. "Word is they're preparing for after the ruling. If it goes against Mrs. Stanton, they mean to take matters into their own hands." Reed exchanged glances with Saul. They had anticipated legal maneuvering, perhaps bribery of the judge. This suggested Cooper was preparing for something more direct and more violent. "Where's Holden?" Reed asked. "Trying to calm things down at the saloon. He sent me to warn you." Reed made a swift decision. "We need to get Emma out of town. Now, before the ruling." "And abandon our case?" Wilson protested. "Patterson might rule in your favor. It won't matter if Cooper's mob gets to us first." Reed turned to Saul. "Can you get her out?" The scout nodded. "Back trail through the livery. Horses are ready." "Wait," Emma interjected. "I'm not leaving. Not now. Not when we're so close." Her eyes blazed with a determination that brooked no argument. "This is my life, my future. I deserve to hear the judge's decision." Reed recognized the futility of arguing with that expression. James had worn it on the morning of Wilderness, when volunteering for the scouting mission that would cost him his life. "All right," he conceded reluctantly. "But at the first sign of trouble, we leave, ruling or no ruling." They returned to the courthouse through a town that seemed to hold its breath. Knots of men gathered on street corners, speaking in low voices. Shopkeepers closed early, shuttering windows. The air carried the electric tension that Reed remembered from the moments before battle. The courtroom was even more crowded than before, the division between factions now stark and hostile. Cooper had returned, his face flushed with whiskey and anticipation. Clara sat primly beside him, hands folded in her lap, a faint smile playing about her lips. Judge Patterson entered, his expression grave. The room fell silent as he took his seat and surveyed the assembled crowd. "After careful consideration of the evidence presented," he began, "I find this case presents extraordinary circumstances requiring extraordinary measures." He fixed Clara with a penetrating stare. "Mrs. Stanton, your claim to guardianship rests on informal arrangements and community perception rather than legal documentation. While this court recognizes your 3 years of providing for the child, serious questions have been raised about the quality of that care." Clara's smile faltered slightly. Cooper leaned forward, knuckles whitening as he gripped the bench. "Mr. Maddox," Patterson continued, turning to Reed, "your claim is based on a wartime promise and recent intervention. While morally compelling, it lacks the legal foundation typically required for guardianship." Reed's heart sank. The judge was setting up a compromise that would satisfy neither side. "Furthermore," Patterson went on, "the allegations regarding Mrs. Stanton's past, while disturbing, remain largely unsubstantiated for the purposes of this proceeding." He paused, shuffling his papers. "However, the documented injuries to Emma Lark while under Mrs. Stanton's care cannot be ignored, nor can the child's consistent testimony regarding her treatment." The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Emma's hand found Reed's, gripping it tightly. "Therefore," Patterson announced, "I am placing Emma Lark in the temporary custody of the territorial authorities, pending a full investigation into all matters raised in today's hearing. She will be transported to Cheyenne tomorrow, where she will remain in the care of the Sisters of Mercy until permanent arrangements can be determined." A roar of protest erupted from both sides of the courtroom. Reed felt Emma's hand turn to ice in his grip. "Silence!" Patterson thundered, banging his gavel. "My decision is final. Sheriff Holden will take the child into protective custody immediately. Mrs. Stanton and Mr. Maddox are both prohibited from contact with Emma Lark until the territorial investigation is complete, a process that may take several months." Clara was on her feet, face contorted with rage. "This is an outrage. The child is mine. Your reaction speaks volumes, Mrs. Stanton, Patterson observed coldly. Sheriff, please escort Mrs. Stanton from my courtroom. But Holden wasn't present to execute the order. Cooper rose, facing the judge with dangerous calm. You've made a mistake today, Patterson, he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. One you'll regret. Are you threatening an officer of the court, Mr. Cooper? Patterson demanded. Cooper smiled thinly. Just stating a fact. Redemption handles its own affairs. Always has. The law applies even here, Mr. Cooper, Patterson replied firmly, and this court has ruled. Miss Lark will depart for Cheyenne tomorrow under territorial escort. Reed leaned close to Emma. We need to leave now, he whispered. This isn't over. She nodded almost imperceptibly, her face ashen. Reed caught Saul's eye across the room, signaling their need for exit. As the courtroom erupted into argument, Reed guided Emma toward the side door where Saul waited. They had almost reached it when Clara's voice cut through the chaos. Stop them! They're taking her! Reed turned to find Clara pointing directly at them, her face twisted with fury. Cooper and several of his men were already moving to block their exit. The judge ordered the girl into custody, Cooper announced loudly. Maddox is kidnapping her. It was a deliberate misrepresentation, but effective. Several townspeople moved to intercept them, uncertain but swayed by Cooper's authority. Reed pushed Emma behind him, facing the advancing men. The judge ordered her into Sheriff Holden's custody. Where is the sheriff? Unavailable, Cooper smiled coldly. But as a deputized citizen of this town, I'm authorized to hold the girl until he returns. Reed's hand inched toward his revolver before he remembered Holden's men had confiscated all weapons at the door. He was unarmed in a room increasingly hostile. The child stays with me until Holden arrives, Reed stated firmly. Judge Patterson's orders. I believe I should clarify my ruling. Patterson's voice cut through the tension. All eyes turned to the judge. Emma Lark is to remain in the custody of this court until Sheriff Holden returns. She will sit here, beside me, until proper authorities arrive to escort her to Cheyenne. Cooper's face darkened with frustration, but he couldn't openly defy the judge. Not yet. He stepped back, gesturing for his men to do the same. Patterson beckoned Emma forward. Come, Miss Lark. You'll be safe here. Reed hesitated, reluctant to surrender Emma to anyone, even the judge. But Patterson's gaze held steady reassurance. With a barely perceptible nod, Reed released Emma's hand. She walked to the judge's bench with her head high, though Reed could see the trembling in her shoulders. Patterson placed a protective hand on her shoulder as she sat beside him. This court is adjourned, Patterson announced. Everyone except court officers will clear the room immediately. As the crowd reluctantly dispersed, Reed caught Emma's eye one last time. Her expression held equal parts fear and determination. She touched the locket beneath her dress, a silent promise that she would endure whatever came next. Reed allowed himself to be ushered out, Saul falling into step beside him. Outside, the winter sun was already sinking toward the horizon, casting long shadows across Redemption's main street. What now? Saul asked quietly. Reed surveyed the town, noting Cooper's men gathering at strategic points. We prepare. Patterson's ruling won't stop Clara, or Cooper. The girl leaves for Cheyenne tomorrow. She'll never make it that far, Reed said grimly. Not if Clara has anything to say about it. As if summoned by his words, Clara Stanton emerged from the courthouse, her black dress stark against the snow-covered street. Her eyes found Reed, and the hatred in them struck him like a physical blow. This isn't over, Maddox, she called, voice carrying in the still air. Not by a long measure. It was the same phrase she'd used when he'd taken Emma from her house, a promise, not a threat. Reed watched her walk away, back straight, head high, the picture of wounded dignity. No, he agreed quietly. It's just beginning. Twilight settled over Redemption like a shroud. Reed and Saul retreated to Wilson's office to assess their options. The doctor had left to check on Reverend Benjamin, leaving them alone with their growing sense of urgency. Patterson's ruling was clever, Saul observed, checking the ammunition in his rifle. By sending Emma to Cheyenne, he removes her from Clara's influence without awarding custody to either party. It's also a death sentence if Clara gets to her first, Reed replied grimly. He studied the town through the small window, watching Cooper's men patrolling the streets. They're waiting for nightfall. The territorial escort won't arrive until morning. Holden conveniently disappeared after the hearing. Saul's weathered face hardened. The judge is alone with the girl in the courthouse. Reed considered their situation. Patterson had placed 2 court deputies outside his chambers, but they were local men, potentially susceptible to Cooper's influence or intimidation. Emma would spend the night under their protection before departing with the territorial authorities at dawn. We need to get to her, Reed decided, tonight, before Clara makes her move. The courthouse will be watched. Then we'll need a distraction. Reed sketched a rough map of the town on Wilson's desk. Cooper's men are concentrated here, and at the saloon. If we create a diversion at the livery, a sharp knock interrupted them. Reed reached for his revolver, still absent after the courthouse confiscation. "It's Holden," came a voice from outside. "Open up, Maddox." Reed exchanged glances with Saul before cautiously opening the door. Sheriff Holden stood alone on the porch, his face haggard in the fading light. "Where the hell have you been?" Reed demanded. "The judge was looking for you to take custody of Emma." "I know." Holden stepped inside, removing his hat. Reed noticed a dark bruise forming on his temple. "Cooper's men jumped me after the hearing. Woke up locked in my own jail." His expression was grim. "They've got something planned for tonight. My deputies are either bought or bullied into looking the other way." "And you're here because," Reed asked warily, "because this has gone too far." Holden sank into a chair. "I've spent 15 years balancing between enforcing the law and keeping peace with Cooper. Told myself I was being practical. But there's a line, Maddox, and they've crossed it." Reed studied the sheriff's face, searching for deception. "What are they planning?" "Clara's convinced Cooper that Emma is the key to everything. Not just the Stanton estate, but some bigger scheme." Holden rubbed his bruised temple. "She wants the girl silenced permanently." Made it sound like Emma knew something that could destroy them both. Reed thought of Emma's testimony, about Clara killing her mother, about girls being sold to Cooper. Perhaps there was more to her knowledge than even Emma realized. "Where's Patterson now?" Saul asked. "Still in his chambers with the girl. 2 deputies outside, but Cooper's replaced them with his own men wearing badges." Holden's expression darkened. "They're waiting for midnight. Clara's got some kind of plan to make Emma's death look like an escape attempt gone wrong." Reed's blood ran cold. We need to move, now." "There's more," Holden continued. "Cooper's men searched your cabin this afternoon. They found something. A lockbox hidden under the floorboards." Reed froze. The lockbox contained documents he'd gathered since the war, including letters from Mary Lark that had arrived too late for James to read them. "What was in it?" he demanded. "Don't know, but whatever it was, it sent Clara into a frenzy. She burned some papers right there in the street. Cooper looked like he'd seen a ghost." Reed and Saul exchanged significant glances. "Mary's letters," Reed said quietly. "She must have written about something that implicated both Clara and Cooper." "Whatever it was, it's ashes now," Holden said. "But it's made them desperate. They can't afford to let Emma live, not with what she might know or remember." Reed paced the small room, mind racing. "We need weapons, and a way into the courthouse that won't trigger an ambush." Holden reached into his coat, producing Reed's revolver. "Took this from the courthouse lockup on my way here. It's not much against Cooper's small army, but it's a start. My rifle's in Wilson's back room," Saul added, "and I always keep a knife." "There's an old tunnel," Holden said suddenly, "from Prohibition days. Connects the courthouse cellar to what used to be the mayor's house. Now the back room of the apothecary. Thompson doesn't know it's there, but my predecessor showed me years ago." "Will it be guarded?" Reed asked. "Doubtful. Most folks have forgotten it exists." Holden sketched the route on Reed's map. "It's narrow, partly collapsed in places, but it'll get you in without being seen." Reed studied the sheriff carefully. "Why are you helping us, Holden, after all these years of looking the other way?" Holden met his gaze steadily. "Because 15 years ago, I swore an oath to uphold the law, not Cooper's law, not whatever serves the town's business interests. The real law." He stood, retrieving his hat. "And because that little girl reminds me of my own daughter, the one I lost to fever while I was too busy playing politics in this godforsaken town." Reed nodded, understanding at last. Redemption had extracted its price from all of them, some in blood, some in soul. "What's your plan once we have Emma?" Saul asked practically. "West," Reed decided. "Through the mountains. There's an old trapper's route that's nearly impassable in winter. Cooper's men won't be able to follow. It's 20 below at night in those passes, Holden warned, with a storm coming. Better than what awaits her here. Reed checked his revolver. We move at nightfall. I'll need you to create a diversion, Sheriff. Something to draw attention away from the courthouse. Holden considered. The saloon. Most of Cooper's men gather there around 8. I could stage a raid, claim illegal gambling, start a commotion. That would work, Saul agreed. But what about Clara? She'll be watching too. Let me worry about Clara, Reed said grimly. Once we have Emma, we head straight for the mountains. No stopping, no hesitation. As they finalized their plans, the doctor returned, bringing news from town. Cooper's called a town meeting at the church, Wilson reported. 8 o'clock. Something about threats to public safety and necessary measures. Rallying support, Holden translated. Creating witnesses who'll swear whatever happens tonight was justified. Reed checked his pocket watch. Just past 6. 2 hours until Cooper's meeting. 6 until Clara's midnight plan. Let's go over the route one more time, Heidi said, focusing on the map. We'll have one chance at this. One chance to save Emma before Clara silences her forever. The winter night had fully descended by the time Reed and Saul made their way to the apothecary. Snow fell in thick, silent flakes, providing additional cover as they slipped through back alleys, avoiding Cooper's patrols. Thompson's apothecary had closed at 5, but Dr. Wilson had provided the key, claiming a need for emergency supplies. The small bell above the door was muffled with a handkerchief as they entered, locking the door behind them. The shop smelled of herbs and chemicals, rows of colored bottles gleaming faintly in the darkness. Reed moved carefully between the shelves, following Holden's directions to the storage room at the back. Here, Saul whispered, indicating a large cabinet against the wall. Should be behind this. Together they shifted the heavy cabinet, revealing a small, half-height door set into the wall. The ancient padlock had long since rusted away, leaving only a metal loop as a reminder of former security. Reed pulled the door open, wincing at the creaking hinges. Beyond lay a narrow tunnel, its ceiling supported by timber beams that had seen better days. I'll go first, he said, lighting the small lantern they'd brought. Watch for weak spots. The tunnel was a relic from an earlier redemption, a time when bootleggers and crooked officials had created their own infrastructure beneath the town's respectable facade. The air was musty and cold, the passage barely wide enough for a man's shoulders. In places, they had to crouch or crawl where ceiling beams had sagged dangerously low. Holden wasn't exaggerating about the collapse, Saul muttered as they navigated a particularly treacherous section. One good tremor and we'd be buried. They emerged after 20 minutes of careful progress, finding themselves in a small cellar beneath the courthouse. Crates of old records and forgotten evidence lined the walls, thick with dust. The stairs should lead up to a storage closet near the judge's chambers, Reed whispered, extinguishing the lantern. From there, we'll have to be silent. Cooper's men will be patrolling the corridors. The courthouse was eerily quiet as they ascended. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving only the false deputies guarding the judge's chambers. Reed could hear voices as they crept down the hallway, 2 men speaking in low tones around the corner. Midnight, like the lady said, one was saying. Judge will be asleep by then. Quick and quiet, make it look like the kid tried to run. What about Patterson? The second voice asked. He's no fool. Cooper says he'll handle the judge. Our job is the girl. Reed's jaw tightened. He glanced at Saul, who nodded grimly. They needed to move quickly. A sudden commotion from the direction of the main entrance provided their opportunity. Shouts and the sound of breaking glass filtered through the building. Holden's diversion right on schedule. What the hell? One of the guards moved toward the noise. Check it out. I'll stay with the door. As footsteps receded down the corridor, Reed motioned to Saul. They rounded the corner to find a single guard outside Patterson's chambers, hand on his revolver as he peered toward the disturbance. Reed moved silently, years of wartime stealth serving him well. The guard sensed movement too late, turning just as Reed's fist connected with his jaw. The man crumpled without a sound. Bind him, Reed instructed Saul, already working on the door. It was locked, not unexpected. He knelt, examining the mechanism. Standard pin tumbler. I can pick it. Hurry, Saul urged, finishing with the unconscious guard. The other one will be back soon. Reed worked methodically, feeling each pin slide into place. After a tense minute, the lock clicked open. He eased the door inward, revolver ready. Judge Patterson was seated at his desk, a small oil lamp casting shadows across his stern features. Emma sat in a chair nearby, her posture rigid with alertness. Both looked up sharply as the door opened. "Maddox," Patterson observed, remarkably composed. "I suspected you might attempt something like this." "Your Honor," Reed acknowledged, scanning the room for other threats. "We need to take Emma. Now." "On what grounds?" Patterson asked, though his tone lacked genuine challenge. "Your deputies have been replaced by Cooper's men," Reed explained rapidly. "They're planning to kill Emma at midnight and make it look like an escape attempt." Patterson's eyes narrowed. "A serious allegation." "We heard them discussing it outside your door," Saul added, and Sheriff Holden confirmed the plot. Emma stood, her face pale but determined. "I knew Clara wouldn't let me leave," she said quietly. "Not alive." Patterson studied them for a long moment, then nodded once. "I suspected as much when my regular deputies were replaced with men I didn't recognize." He rose from his desk. "Miss Lark, I placed you in territorial custody for your protection. If that protection has been compromised, then the court's purpose is no longer served." He unlocked a drawer in his desk, removing Emma's small bundle of possessions. "You understand, Mr. Maddox, that I cannot officially sanction this, nor can I prevent it." "I understand, Your Honor." Patterson turned to Emma. "Young lady, the law has failed you tonight. For that, I am deeply sorry." He handed her the bundle. "Whatever happens next, remember that not all men of law are corrupt. Some of us still believe in justice." Emma accepted her belongings with a solemn nod. "Thank you for trying, Your Honor." A shout from the corridor interrupted them. The second guard had returned and discovered his unconscious colleague. "We need to move," Saul urged. "Back the way we came." Reed took Emma's hand. "Stay close. Do exactly as I say." They slipped back into the hallway as boots pounded toward them from the main entrance. The cellar door was just ahead, partially concealed behind a filing cabinet. "Halt!" a voice commanded from behind them. "Stop or I'll shoot." Reed pushed Emma toward Saul. "Get her to the tunnel. I'll hold them off." "Captain," Saul began to protest. "Go," Reed ordered, turning to face their pursuers. "I'll be right behind you." As Saul and Emma disappeared through the cellar door, Reed took cover behind a heavy oak desk. Two of Cooper's men rounded the corner, revolvers drawn. "Maddox," one called, "we know you've got the girl. Give her up and Cooper might let you live." Reed's answer was a carefully placed shot that splintered the wall beside the man's head. Both guards dove for cover, returning fire. Wood exploded from the desk as bullets struck it. Reed waited for a pause in the shooting, then fired twice more, forcing the men back around the corner. He used the moment to retreat toward the cellar door, slipping through and barring it behind him. In the darkness of the stairwell, he collided with Saul. "Emma's in the tunnel," Saul whispered, "but we've got a problem. There's water rising from below. The storm must have flooded the lower end." Reed cursed silently. "How deep?" "Knee-high and rising. We can still make it through, but we'll need to move fast." Above them, the cellar door shuddered as someone threw their weight against it. The bar wouldn't hold for long. "Let's go," Reed decided, following Saul down the stairs. Their lantern revealed Emma waiting at the tunnel entrance, water already swirling around her ankles. "It's cold," she warned, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "We'll move quickly," Reed promised, checking that her bundle was securely tied. "Stay between Saul and me." They plunged into the flooded tunnel as the sound of splintering wood echoed from above. The water was numbingly cold, flowing from the direction of the apothecary. It had risen to mid-thigh by the time they reached the halfway point. "The tunnel's draining the street above," Saul explained, helping Emma over a fallen beam, storm waters finding the path of least resistance. Their progress slowed as the water continued to rise. Emma fought bravely against the current, but Reed could see her strength flagging. When she stumbled for the third time, he lifted her onto his back. "Hold tight," he instructed. "We're almost there." The collapsed section they'd navigated earlier was now treacherous, a narrow crawl space with water flowing through it. Reed passed Emma to Saul, then cleared debris to widen the opening. "You first," he told Emma. "Saul will be right behind you. I'll follow last." She nodded, face set with determination despite her shivering. "Like tracking through the snow," she said, summoning a ghost of a smile. "Just wetter." Reed watched as she navigated the flooded crawlspace, moving with the deliberate care he'd taught her. Saul followed close behind. Reed waited until they were safely through before entering the passage himself. Halfway through, a sound from behind made him turn. Lights bobbed in the darkness. Cooper's men had found the tunnel and were in pursuit. Reed increased his pace, ignoring the pain in his wounded shoulder as he forced himself through the narrow space. Water rose around him, its cold bite seeping through his clothes. A shot rang out, the bullet embedding itself in the wooden support inches from his head. Finally, he emerged into the apothecary cellar to find Saul and Emma waiting. The water was almost waist-high now. "They're right behind me," Reed warned. "We need to collapse the tunnel." Saul understood immediately. He pointed to a supporting beam near the entrance. "That one's holding most of the weight. Take it out, and the whole section goes." Reed positioned himself beside the beam, drawing his knife. "Get Emma upstairs. I'll be right behind you." "No," Emma protested. "Not without you." "I'll follow," Reed promised. "Now go." Reluctantly, Emma allowed Saul to guide her toward the stairs. Reed waited until they were safely ascending, then began cutting into the waterlogged beam. The wood was soft from years of dampness, yielding easily to his blade. Another shot rang out, closer this time. A face appeared in the tunnel opening, one of Cooper's men, revolver aimed at Reed. But the water hampered his aim, the bullet going wide. With a final thrust, Reed severed the weakened beam. A groan rippled through the ceiling as timber cracked and earth shifted. The tunnel entrance collapsed in a rush of dirt, wood, and water, burying the pursuing man beneath the debris. Reed staggered back, swept off his feet by the surge of water. He fought his way to the stairs, hauling himself up as the cellar continued to collapse behind him. He emerged into the apothecary to find Saul and Emma waiting by the back door. Outside, the storm had intensified, snow driving horizontally through the streets of Redemption. "The horses?" Reed asked, catching his breath. "Ready behind Wilson's," Saul confirmed, "if we can reach them undetected." Reed peered through the window. Cooper's men were concentrated around the courthouse and saloon, leaving the back alleys relatively clear. The diversion Holden had created, now a full-blown brawl spilling out of the saloon, had drawn most of the attention. "We'll have to risk it," Reed decided. "Stay in the shadows, move quickly. If we get separated, head for the North Trail. Meet at the old hunter's cabin." Emma, still shivering from the cold water, nodded resolutely. "I'm ready." They slipped out into the storm, using the driving snow as cover. The back alleys of Redemption were treacherous with ice, forcing them to move more slowly than Reed would have liked. They had covered half the distance to Wilson's when a shout rose from behind them. "There, by the apothecary." Reed turned to see two of Cooper's men pointing in their direction. "Run," he urged Emma and Saul. "Don't stop for anything." They sprinted through the snow, boots slipping on the icy ground. Shots rang out, bullets kicking up snow around them. Reed returned fire, forcing their pursuers to seek cover. As they rounded the corner toward Wilson's office, a figure stepped into their path. Clara Stanton, her black dress billowing in the wind, a revolver clutched in her gloved hand. "That's far enough," she said, voice cutting through the storm, her eyes fixed on Emma with predatory intensity. "You've caused quite enough trouble, child." Reed stepped in front of Emma, his own revolver aimed at Clara. "It's over, Clara. Let us pass." "Over?" Clara laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "It's hardly begun. Do you have any idea what's at stake here? What that girl represents?" "I know you killed her mother," Reed said steadily, "and your husband, and probably others before them." Clara's smile twisted. "Necessary removals. Unfortunate, but required for progress." She took a step closer, revolver unwavering. "Redemption is changing, Mr. Maddox. The railroad will transform this backwater into a proper city. Those who stand in the way of progress must be eliminated. And Emma stands in your way? She knows too much, has seen too much." Clara's gaze shifted to Emma. Just like her mother, Mary discovered certain arrangements between Nicholas and Mr. Cooper. Arrangements that would have ruined everything if made public. Emma stepped forward, despite Reed's restraining hand. "You pushed my mother down the stairs," she said, voice steady despite her shivering. "I saw you." "Yes, you did," Clara acknowledged coldly. "A mistake I won't repeat. This time there will be no witnesses." She raised her revolver. Reed moved to shield Emma, but before Clara could fire, another shot rang out from the darkness. Clara staggered, a look of surprise crossing her face as blood blossomed across her shoulder. Sheriff Holden emerged from the shadows, his revolver smoking in the cold air. "Drop it, Clara," he commanded. "It's finished." Clara's face contorted with fury. Instead of complying, she swung her revolver toward Holden. He fired again without hesitation, the bullet striking Clara squarely in the chest. She crumpled to the snow, her last expression one of outraged disbelief. "Go," Holden urged Reed. "Cooper's men are regrouping. I'll hold them here as long as I can." Reed clasped his hand briefly. "Thank you, Sheriff. Just get that child to safety," Holden replied grimly. "And perhaps someday, bring her back to a better redemption than the one she's leaving." They continued to Wilson's, where 3 saddled horses waited in the barn. The doctor himself was there, hastily packing saddlebags with supplies. "Medicine, food, blankets," he explained. "Enough to get you through the mountains if you're careful." He handed Emma a heavy wool coat lined with fur. "This was my daughter's. Should keep you warm in the passes." Emma accepted the coat with quiet dignity. "Thank you, De Wilson." "The North Trail will be watched," Saul warned as they mounted. "Cooper's not a fool." "Then we'll make for Elk Pass instead," Reed decided. "It's steeper, more dangerous, but they won't expect it in this weather." A distant shout from the direction of the courthouse suggested their escape had been discovered. Cooper's men would be searching the town now, closing in on Wilson's property. "Whatever happens," Reed told Emma as they prepared to ride, "stay with Saul. He knows the mountains better than anyone. He'll get you to safety if we're separated." Emma looked up at him, her young face showing a maturity beyond her years. "We stay together," she insisted. "No more separation. That's how they beat us." Reed nodded, remembering James's similar stubbornness. "Together then, but if the worst happens—" "It won't," Emma said with surprising conviction. "We've come too far." They rode out into the storm, leaving redemption and its corrupted justice behind. The snow swallowed the sound of their horses' hooves as they made for the mountains looming dark against the night sky. Behind them, lights moved through the town as Cooper's men continued their search. The trail climbed steeply, winding through pine forests heavy with snow. The temperature dropped further as they gained elevation, the storm intensifying around them. Emma rode between Reed and Saul, her small form bundled against the cold. They had been riding for nearly an hour when the sound of pursuit reached them. Horses laboring up the trail below, men's voices carried on the wind. "Cooper," Saul confirmed, glancing back. "At least 6 riders." Reed assessed their options. They were still hours from the safety of the high passes. In this weather, with Emma already exhausted from the escape, they couldn't outrun a determined pursuit. "There's a ridge ahead," he decided. "Defensible position, clear lines of sight. We make our stand there." "Against 6 men?" Saul questioned. "We have the high ground, and they'll be struggling with the snow." Reed checked his ammunition, 5 rounds remaining in his revolver. "Besides, we only need to hold them until dawn. The territorial escort will be searching for Emma by then." The ridge was a natural fortress, a rocky outcrop overlooking the trail, protected on 3 sides by steep drops. They secured the horses in a sheltered hollow and took positions among the boulders. Emma, despite Reed's objections, insisted on remaining with them rather than taking cover. "I can reload," she said practically. "You taught me how." The pursuers appeared 20 minutes later, Cooper himself leading 5 of his men up the snow-covered trail. They moved cautiously, aware they were entering a potential ambush. "Maddox," Cooper called, voice carrying through the storm. "I know you're up there. Send down the girl and you can ride away. My quarrel isn't with you." "It became my quarrel when you tried to kill us," Reed replied, his voice echoing among the rocks. "Turn back, Cooper. This ends tonight." Cooper's laugh was ugly in the darkness. "You're outnumbered and trapped on a mountain in a blizzard. How exactly do you see this ending in your favor?" "The same way the war ended," Reed answered calmly, "with men like you on the losing side." Cooper's response was immediate. "Take them," he ordered his men. "The girl alive if possible. The others are expendable." The night erupted in gunfire as Cooper's men charged the ridge. Reed and Saul held their positions, making each shot count. 2 attackers fell in the first volley, but the others found cover, returning fire from behind trees and rocks. Emma worked behind them, reloading revolvers with fingers numbed by cold but still nimble. Her face was set in concentration, fear pushed aside by the immediate need for action. The firefight continued, bullets chipping stone and spraying snow. Reed felt a burning across his ribs as a shot grazed him, but ignored the pain. Beside him, Saul fired with the precision of a lifelong hunter, each bullet finding its mark. Cooper himself remained hidden, directing his men without exposing himself to fire. A skilled tactician, Reed realized, more dangerous than he'd first appeared. Ammunition's running low, Saul reported after a lull in the shooting. 3 rounds left. Reed checked his own revolver. 2 bullets remaining. Make them count. Focus on Cooper if you get a clear shot. The attack resumed with renewed intensity. One of Cooper's men made a dash for their position, only to be cut down by Saul's careful aim. But the victory was short-lived. Saul grunted in pain as a return shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him against the rocks. "Saul, am I?" Emma cried, rushing to his side. "I'm all right," he grimaced, pressing a hand to the wound. "Keep loading." The storm was working in their favor, making accuracy difficult for the attackers below. But Reed knew time was against them. Cooper had men to spare, while they were trapped and running out of ammunition. A movement in his peripheral vision caught Reed's attention, a figure climbing the steep slope to their left, attempting to flank them. Cooper himself using the gunfire as distraction. "Watch the left," Reed warned Saul, turning to meet the new threat. But his revolver clicked empty as he aimed. In the second it took to reach for Emma's loaded weapon, Cooper cleared the ridge, his own gun trained on Reed. "It's over, Maddox," Cooper announced, breathing heavily from the climb. Snow dusted his expensive coat, his face red with exertion and rage. "Drop your weapons, all of you." Reed slowly raised his hands. Behind Cooper, he could see the remaining men advancing up the trail. Saul, wounded but still dangerous, kept his rifle aimed from his position against the rocks. "Let Emma go," Reed bargained. "She's just a child. Your quarrel is with me." Cooper's smile was cold. "The child is the whole point, Maddox. Or haven't you figured that out yet?" His gaze shifted to Emma, who stood rigidly beside Saul. "Clara was right about one thing. You know too much, girl, especially after finding those letters." "Letters?" Reed asked, buying time as he assessed options for disarming Cooper. "Mary Lark's final correspondence," Cooper explained, detailing her discovery that Nicholas Stanton wasn't just a banker. He was laundering money for certain interests looking to control the railroad contracts. "Interests I represent." "And Emma's mother threatened to expose you," Reed guessed. "She thought she could blackmail us," Cooper confirmed, a fatal miscalculation. "So Clara pushed her down the stairs," Emma said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Just like she did to others before. And you helped cover it up." "Clara had a certain efficiency about her," Cooper acknowledged, "but she became a liability. Too unstable, too obsessed with controlling you." He raised his revolver. "Unfortunately, you've forced my hand. Now we do this the hard way." Reed tensed, preparing to lunge despite the near certainty of being shot. Before he could move, a new sound cut through the storm, a voice from behind Cooper. "Drop it, Cooper, or I put a bullet through your spine." Sheriff Holden stood at the edge of the ridge, revolver steady despite the blood staining his coat. His badge gleamed in the dim light, a symbol of authority reclaimed. Cooper froze, his calculation visible as he weighed his options. "You're bleeding out, Holden," he observed. "Doubt you could hit me if you tried." "Maybe," Holden acknowledged, "but I've got nothing left to lose. You've seen to that." The standoff stretched, neither man willing to back down. Below, Cooper's remaining men had stopped their advance, awaiting direction. "It's over, Cooper," Reed said quietly. "Clara's dead. Your scheme is exposed. Even if you kill us all, there will be questions. Investigations. The territorial authorities are already on their way." Something flickered in Cooper's eyes, the first hint of doubt. His empire was built on influence and appearance, not outright warfare. A massacre on a mountainside would bring the kind of attention his backers couldn't afford. "You think you've won?" he asked bitterly. "This is bigger than redemption. Bigger than you or me. There's too much money involved for it to end here." "Maybe so," Holden conceded. "But it does end here for you. Now drop the gun." Cooper's face hardened. For a terrible moment, Reed thought he would fire anyway, choosing destruction over surrender. Then slowly, Cooper lowered his revolver. Tell your men to withdraw, Holden ordered, all the way back to town. Cooper hesitated, then called down to his remaining followers. Pull back, we're done here. As the men retreated, Holden approached cautiously, keeping his gun trained on Cooper. On your knees, hands behind your head. Cooper complied, his expression murderous. You're a dead man, Holden. You know that, right? They'll come for you with Bauma. Probably, Holden agreed, binding Cooper's hands with a length of rope. But I'll die a lawman, not a coward. As the immediate danger passed, Reed turned his attention to Saul's wound. The scout was pale from blood loss, but conscious, his eyes clear. Not as bad as it looks, Saul insisted, as Reed examined the injury. Bullet went through clean. Emma had already torn strips from her petticoat, offering them as bandages. Her hands were steady as she helped Reed bind the wound. You did well, Reed told her quietly. Your father would be proud. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I was scared, she admitted, but I remembered what you said about fear. That it's not about not being afraid. It's about acting despite fear. She nodded, like you did, and Saul, and Sheriff Holden. Holden approached, keeping Cooper covered with his revolver. Territorial escorts should reach Redemption by dawn. If we can get down the mountain, we can meet them on the main road. Can you travel? Reed asked Saul, who nodded grimly. Not the first bullet I've carried, he replied. Won't be the last. As they prepared to descend, the storm began to ease, the first hint of dawn lightening the eastern sky. Reed helped Emma onto her horse, checking that Cooper was securely bound across his own saddle. What happens now? Emma asked as they started down the trail. Reed considered the question. The immediate danger had passed, but the future remained uncertain. Cooper's backers would indeed seek retribution. Clara was dead, but the corruption in Redemption had deeper roots. First, we get you safely to Cheyenne, he said. Then we present all the evidence. Cooper's confession, Clara's crimes, everything, to the territorial governor. And then, Emma pressed, where will I go? Reed met her gaze steadily. That depends on you, Emma. Judge Patterson's ruling still stands. You're a ward of the territory now. But I intend to petition for formal guardianship, if you'll have me. Emma studied him with that penetrating gaze so like her father's. You'd still want me? Even after all this trouble? Especially after all this, Reed assured her. You've proven yourself a dozen times over. Your father would be proud of the person you are becoming. He hesitated, then added, I'm proud to know you, Emma Lark. Something shifted in her expression. A warming, like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. I'd like that, she said simply, to stay with you. As they continued down the mountain, Reed felt a weight lift that he hadn't realized he was carrying. For 20 years, he'd been defined by a promise made to a dying soldier, a debt he couldn't repay. Now perhaps he'd found something more valuable than absolution, a future. The dawn light strengthened, revealing the valley below and, in the distance, the approaching dust of riders, the territorial escort coming to collect their charge. Emma rode beside Reed, her back straight despite the exhaustion of the night. Look, she said suddenly, pointing toward the eastern horizon where the sun was breaking through the clouds. New day. Reed followed her gaze, seeing not just the sunrise but the promise it represented. For Emma, for himself, perhaps even for redemption. New day, he agreed quietly. New beginnings. The territorial escort, 6 grim-faced men in heavy buffalo coats, met them at the base of the trail as dawn fully broke over the Wyoming landscape. Their leader, a weathered marshal named Gideon Reeves, took in the scene with the practiced assessment of a man who'd seen the worst of frontier justice. Sheriff Holden, he acknowledged, eyeing the wounded lawman. Your telegram said you needed assistance with a custody matter. Didn't mention a gunfight and prisoners. Holden, pale from blood loss but still upright in the saddle, gestured toward Cooper. Hank Cooper. Charges include conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and if you dig deep enough, probably a dozen more serious crimes. Reeves studied Cooper's bound form. The banker thought he practically owned redemption. He did, Reed confirmed. That was the problem. Emma sat silently on her horse, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders, though her eyes remained alert. When Reeves turned his attention to her, she straightened, meeting his gaze directly. And this must be the girl, Reeves said more gently. Emma Lark? She nodded once. Yes, sir. Reeves dismounted, approaching her with a respectful nod. Judge Patterson wired ahead about your situation. Said you've shown remarkable courage. He glanced at the blood and dirt staining her clothes. Looks like he wasn't exaggerating. Emma needs medical attention, Reed interjected. We all do, and somewhere safe to recover before the journey to Cheyenne. Reeves considered this, then nodded. Dunford Station is about 2 hours' ride east of here. Telegraph, Doctor? Secure enough to hold Cooper until we can arrange proper transport. He gestured to one of his men. Davis, ride ahead. Have them prepare accommodations and alert the doctor. As the rider departed, Reeves helped Holden dismount, examining his wound. You need immediate attention, Sheriff. I'll live, Holden grimaced. Seen worse. Still, you'll ride double with Benson here, Reeves decided. Save your strength. Reed watched the marshal's efficiency with approval. Reeves was clearly a man who understood both danger and duty, someone who could be trusted with Emma's safety. What about Clara Stanton? Reed asked as they prepared to depart. Dead, Holden confirmed. Left her body in redemption. Dr. Wilson will see to proper arrangements. Cooper laughed bitterly from his bound position. Already rewriting history, Holden? You shot her in cold blood. After she tried to murder a child, Holden retorted. A fact I'll testify to under oath. It won't matter, Cooper said, his voice dropping to a menacing certainty. The Railroad Consortium doesn't care about one woman or one child. They want that land, and they'll get it. With or without me. Reed moved his horse alongside Cooper's. Perhaps, he acknowledged quietly, but they'll have to do it without Emma's blood on their hands, and without yours to do their dirty work. Something flickered across Cooper's face, not quite regret, but a shadow of realization. He'd been as much a tool as a mastermind, dispensable once his usefulness ended. Their small caravan set off toward Dunford Station, the territorial men forming a protective barrier around Emma. She rode silently beside Reed, occasionally glancing back toward the mountains where they'd made their stand. Are you all right? Reed asked softly, noting her pallor. Just tired, she replied, though her expression suggested deeper thoughts. After a moment, she added, I never thought I'd leave redemption. Not alive, anyway. The blunt assessment struck Reed like a physical blow, a reminder of how thoroughly hope had been extinguished in her young life before he'd found her. It wasn't all of redemption that was corrupt, he reminded her. Holden found his conscience. Dr. Wilson, Reverend Benjamin, they stood with us. Emma considered this. Do you think they'll be safe when we're gone? It was a perceptive question, one Reed had been wrestling with himself. Cooper's consortium wouldn't simply abandon their plans because of one setback. I think, he said carefully, that light has a way of disinfecting darkness. What happened last night, Cooper's arrest, Clara's death, it breaks their control, gives the town a chance to find its own redemption. Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. They rode in companionable silence for several miles, the winter sun struggling to warm the frozen landscape. My mother used to sing, Emma said suddenly, the non sequitur catching Reed by surprise, when she thought no one was listening. Old songs from back east. She touched the locket beneath her dress. I'd forgotten that until now. Reed understood what was happening. With safety came the space for memories, for grief long suppressed by survival's demands. He'd seen it in soldiers after battle, this delayed reckoning with loss. What songs? He asked gently. A small smile touched her lips. Shenandoah was her favorite, and Barbara Allen. She glanced at him. Did my father sing? Terribly, Reed confirmed, returning her smile. But often, the men used to beg him to stop, especially on night marches when silence was crucial. Emma's laugh was unexpected, a bright, clear sound that turned heads among their escorts. It transformed her face, revealing the child beneath the survivor's mask. Tell me more, she requested. About him, the small things. So Reed did. As they rode toward Dunford Station, he shared the everyday details of James Lark, his habit of collecting unusual pebbles, his talent for mimicking bird calls, his legendary appetite for applesauce but hatred of stewed apples. Made no sense, Reed recalled fondly. Same ingredients, but he'd devour one and refuse the other. These stories seemed to sustain Emma more than rest or food could have. Each one formed another thread connecting her to a father she'd never known, weaving a tapestry of identity beyond orphan or victim. By the time Dunford Station appeared on the horizon, a cluster of sturdy log buildings surrounded by a high stockade, Emma sat straighter in her saddle, as if the weight of redemption had begun to lift from her shoulders. Dunford Station had begun as a military outpost before transitioning to a stagecoach stop when the Army moved further west. Its central building combined telegraph office, general store, and modest accommodations for travelers. A small infirmary stood nearby, where the local doctor, a gruff former Army surgeon named Hammond, maintained his practice. They were met at the gate by Davis and an older man Reed presumed was Dunford himself, broad-shouldered despite his years, with a magnificent white beard and the watchful eyes of someone who'd survived the frontier's harshest lessons. "Marshal Reeves," Dunford greeted them. "Got your man setting up rooms. Doctors ready for your wounded." His gaze swept over their bedraggled group, lingering on Cooper's bound form. "That the prisoner?" "One of them," Reeves confirmed, dismounting. "Need somewhere secure to hold him until the judge arrives." "Storage cellar under the main house," Dunford offered. "One way in, one way out. Solid door with good locks. Used it before for similar purposes." As Cooper was led away under heavy guard, protesting but powerless, Reed helped Emma down from her horse. She swayed slightly on her feet, exhaustion finally claiming its toll now that danger had passed. "Let's get you to the doctor," Reed suggested, but she shook her head. "Saul and Sheriff Holden need him more. I'm just tired." "Still, you should be checked," Reed insisted. "That water in the tunnel was freezing, and you've had no proper rest in days." Dunford approached, his weathered face softening as he regarded Emma. "My wife's prepared a room for the young lady, hot bath, clean clothes, and soup waiting. Best medicine there is sometimes." Emma looked to Reed for guidance, a small gesture that spoke volumes about the trust that had developed between them. "Go with Mr. Dunford," he encouraged. "I'll check on Saul and the sheriff, then come find you." She nodded, then surprised him by quickly embracing him before following Dunford toward the main house. The spontaneous gesture left Reed momentarily speechless, a simple act of affection from a child who had learned to expect only cruelty from adults. Dr. Hammond proved efficient but unsympathetic as he treated the wounded men. Saul's gunshot wound was cleaned, stitched, and bandaged with brisk precision. Holden's injury was more serious. The bullet had lodged near his liver, requiring delicate extraction. "He'll live," Hammond announced after the procedure. "If infection doesn't set in, keep him still for at least a week." Reed's own injuries, the bullet graze across his ribs and shoulder wound, were deemed trivial and treated accordingly. By the time Hammond finished with them, the winter afternoon was fading toward evening. Marshal Reeves found Reed as he was leaving the infirmary. "Got a telegraph from Judge Patterson," he reported. "He's scheduled a formal hearing in Cheyenne next week. Wants you and the girl there to testify." "We'll be ready," Reed assured him. "There's more," Reeves added, his expression grave. Seems Cooper wasn't exaggerating about his connections. "The Railroad Consortium has already dispatched representatives to investigate the irregularities in redemption." "Meaning they are looking to salvage their investment," Reed translated. "And possibly silence witnesses," Reeves confirmed. "I've requested additional marshals for the journey to Cheyenne. In the meantime, we keep the girl close and secure." Reed nodded his agreement. "What about Cooper?" "Judge Harmon arrives tomorrow to formally arraign him. After that, he's headed for the territorial prison to await trial." Reeves studied Reed carefully. "You should know, men like Cooper rarely face justice. Too much money, too many connections." "I'm aware," Reed acknowledged. "But we have his confession on the mountain, multiple witnesses to the attempted murder, and Emma's testimony about Clara's crimes. It's more than most get against men like him." "True enough." Reeves seemed satisfied with Reed's pragmatism. "Get some rest, Maddox. You look dead on your feet." Reed found Emma in the small dining room of the main house, seated before a half-eaten bowl of stew. Mrs. Dunford, a formidable woman with kind eyes, had provided clean clothes that hung loosely on Emma's thin frame. Her damp hair was neatly braided, and some color had returned to her cheeks. "How are Saul and Sheriff Holden?" she asked immediately, setting down her spoon. "Resting comfortably," Reed assured her, taking the seat opposite. "Holden will need time to recover, but the doctor says he'll be fine." Relief crossed Emma's face. And Cooper? Secured in the cellar. A judge arrives tomorrow to formally charge him. Emma nodded, pushing her stew around the bowl without eating. Reed recognized the signs of a mind too full for appetite. Something's troubling you, he observed quietly. She met his gaze directly. What happens after Cheyenne, after the testimony? It was the question Reed had been considering since Judge Patterson's ruling. The legal path forward remained uncertain, despite their escape from immediate danger. I meant what I said on the mountain, he told her. I intend to petition for formal guardianship, if that's what you want. And if they refuse? The fear in her voice was carefully controlled, but unmistakable. For a child who had lost everything repeatedly, even hope was a dangerous luxury. Then we appeal. Appeal, Reed said firmly. I am appealing. I made a promise to your father, Emma. I intend to keep it. She studied him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to read intentions beyond words. What if I wasn't James Lark's daughter? Would you still want me then? The question caught Reed off guard with its perception. She had identified the core of his initial motivation, a debt of honor to a fallen comrade, and challenged its sufficiency. Yes, he answered without hesitation, surprising himself with the certainty. What began as a promise has become something more. I want you to stay with me, Emma. Not because of who your father was, but because of who you are. Something shifted in her expression, a wariness giving way to cautious belief. She nodded once, then resumed eating with renewed purpose. Later, as lamps were lit against the gathering darkness, Reed sat on the porch of the main house, watching the perimeter where Reeves's men maintained their vigilant patrol. The events of the past week seemed simultaneously distant and immediate, a whirlwind that had forever altered the course of multiple lives. Saul joined him despite the doctor's orders for bed rest, settling carefully onto the neighboring chair with a grunt of pain. You should be resting, Reed admonished half-heartedly. Done enough resting for one day, Saul replied. Needed air. He studied the darkening sky. Storms passed, stars coming out. They sat in companionable silence. Two men accustomed to the quiet understanding that develops between those who have faced death together. The girl's strong, Saul observed finally. Stronger than she knows. Reed nodded, like her father. No, Saul corrected gently. Like herself. James was brave, yes, but he followed. Emma leads, even now, it's in her eyes. The assessment surprised Reed, but as he considered it, he recognized its truth. Emma's determination, her clear-eyed assessment of danger, her unflinching confrontation of reality, these were qualities uniquely hers, forged in circumstances no child should endure. What will you do? Saul asked. After Cheyenne? It was a question Reed had been pondering since their escape. The homestead near Redemption no longer felt safe, not with Cooper's consortium still eyeing the railroad route. But starting over elsewhere would mean abandoning land he'd worked for 15 years. I don't know, he admitted. Emma needs stability, education. Things I'm not sure I can provide on a remote homestead. Saul considered this. My people have a saying, home is not where you dwell, but where you are understood. Perhaps what the child needs most is not a place, but a person who sees her truly. The wisdom resonated with Reed's own experience. After Sarah's death, the homestead had become merely shelter, not home, a distinction he understood viscerally. You could go west, Saul suggested. Oregon Territory has good land, growing settlements, far enough from Cooper's reach. Maybe, Reed acknowledged, but that's a decision Emma should help make. She's had enough choices taken from her term. Their conversation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. Marshal Reeves emerged from the shadows, his expression troubled. Telegraph just came through, he announced without preamble. Judge Harmon won't be arriving tomorrow after all. His stage was delayed in Laramie. Delayed how? Reed asked, already suspecting the answer. Mechanical failure, apparently, Reeves replied skeptically. Meanwhile, representatives of Western Continental Railroad arrived in Redemption this afternoon. They're requesting Cooper's immediate transfer back to town for local proceedings. The implications were clear. Cooper's consortium was moving quickly to regain control of the situation, potentially circumventing territorial justice. They can't override a territorial custody order, Reed pointed out. Legally, no, Reeves agreed, but frontier law has a way of bending when enough money is applied. He lowered his voice. I don't trust this, Maddox. Something feels wrong. Reed shared the marshal's unease. Cooper had been too confident, too certain of intervention. What do you suggest? We move tonight, Reeves decided. Get Cooper to Cheyenne ahead of schedule before his friends can arrange an accident or legal maneuver. I've got 3 men I trust implicitly. We'll take the eastern route, avoid the main roads. And Emma, Reed asked, stays here with you and my remaining deputies until the regular escort arrives tomorrow. Separating her from Cooper removes the immediate danger. Reeves met Reed's gaze directly. Unless you object? Reed considered the plan. It made tactical sense. Cooper was the primary target for rescue, Emma for elimination. Separating them divided the consortium's resources. No objection, he agreed, but double the guard tonight. If they know Cooper's being moved, they might try for Emma while you're gone. Already arranged, Reeves confirmed. Davis and Johnson are my best men. They'll maintain perimeter security. He glanced toward the main house. How much does the girl know about these developments? Nothing yet, Reed replied, but she deserves the truth. She's earned that much. Reeves nodded his understanding. We move Cooper at midnight. Keep this between us for now. He departed as quietly as he'd arrived, leaving Reed and Saul to contemplate this new development. I don't like it, Saul said after ensuring Reeves was out of earshot. Splitting our strength. Neither do I, Reed admitted, but holding Cooper here isn't an option if his people are mobilizing. Saul leaned forward, wincing at the movement. I'll stand watch tonight. Can still shoot with one arm. Reed appreciated the offer but shook his head. You need to heal. Besides, I'll be awake anyway. He rose, muscles protesting after the day's exertions. I should talk to Emma, explain what's happening. He found her in the small room Mrs. Dunford had prepared, sitting cross-legged on the bed with James's service revolver disassembled before her. She was meticulously cleaning each part, her movements precise and focused. You taught me well, she said without looking up, having recognized his footsteps. Oil, then wipe dry. Check the cylinder for fouling. Inspect the firing pin. Reed leaned against the door frame, watching her reassemble the weapon with surprising dexterity. Your father would be impressed. He was always particular about maintaining his sidearm. Emma placed the completed revolver beside her mellow. I want to be ready, if they come again. Her matter-of-fact preparation without hysteria or denial reinforced Saul's assessment of her strength. This was a child who had learned to face reality head-on, however harsh. Reed closed the door and sat on the room's single chair. There's been a development, he began, explaining Reeves's plan and the concerning telegraph. Emma listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious. They won't let him go to prison, she concluded when he had finished. Cooper knows too much about their operation. Probably not, Reed acknowledged, seeing no benefit in false reassurance. But his removal from redemption has already disrupted their plans. And his testimony implicates others who might now be exposed to scrutiny. Emma considered this. So even if he escapes justice, we've still accomplished something. Yes, Reed confirmed, impressed by her pragmatism. And your testimony in Cheyenne will ensure the full story is documented officially, regardless of Cooper's fate. She nodded, accepting this reality. After a moment, she asked, do you think my mother knew about the railroad conspiracy? Reed recalled Mary's letters, now lost to Clara's vindictive fire. I believe she discovered part of it, enough to threaten Nicholas Stanton, which ultimately led to her death. She was brave, Emma said quietly. I want to be brave like her. You already are, Reed assured her, braver than most adults I've known. Emma's next question caught him off guard with its directness. If we go to Oregon like Saul suggested, could we take Sheriff Holden with us? He has nowhere else to go now. Reed blinked in surprise. You heard that conversation? A hint of mischief crossed her face. The window was open, and you weren't exactly whispering. Despite the seriousness of their situation, Reed found himself chuckling. Eavesdropping is generally considered impolite, you know. So is keeping important discussions from people they affect, she countered with impeccable logic. You didn't answer my question about Sheriff Holden. Reed considered it seriously. If he wants to come and if the doctors clear him for travel, I don't see why not. Though I'm not sure a former sheriff and a wounded scout were part of my original guardianship plan. Family comes in many forms, Emma said with surprising wisdom. That's what Reverend Benjamin always said. The observation silenced Reed momentarily. family. The word held meaning beyond blood, something he'd understood in the war, where bonds formed in fire often proved stronger than those of birth. Perhaps Emma, in her young wisdom, had identified what they were gradually becoming. "We should rest," he said finally. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." Emma nodded, then asked hesitantly, "Would you stay, just until I fall asleep? I keep seeing Clara's face when I close my eyes." Reed settled back in the chair. "I'll stay as long as you need." Emma arranged herself under the blankets, the revolver still within reach. "Will you tell me another story about my father?" So Reed did, speaking softly of springtime in Virginia, of James teaching the company how to find wild berries, of small moments of humanity amid war's desolation. He continued until Emma's breathing deepened into sleep, her face relaxed for perhaps the first time since he'd known her. Only then did he allow his own exhaustion to surface, though he remained vigilantly awake. Outside, he could hear the muffled movements of Reeves's men preparing for Cooper's midnight departure. The night stretched ahead, pregnant with both danger and possibility. Reed found himself contemplating futures he'd thought forever closed after Sarah's death. Not just survival, but life. A home built on understanding, as Saul had suggested. Family forged through choice rather than circumstance. Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring something indistinct. Reed leaned forward, gently adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. She settled again, one hand unconsciously reaching toward the locket containing her parents' mementos. "I'll keep you safe," Reed promised softly, "whatever comes next." As midnight approached, the sounds outside grew more purposeful. Cooper would soon be on his way to Cheyenne, and to whatever justice the territorial court could enforce against such powerful interests. Reed rose carefully from the chair, checking that his revolver was loaded before moving to the window. The station yard was alive with quiet activity, horses being readied, men conferring in hushed tones. Reeves was personally overseeing Cooper's transfer from the cellar to a waiting wagon, the prisoner's protest muffled by the night. Beyond the stockade walls, the Wyoming wilderness stretched vast and indifferent beneath a sky brilliant with stars. Somewhere in that darkness, Reed knew forces were gathering, men sent by the consortium to recover their investment and eliminate witnesses. The night's peace was illusory, a temporary reprieve rather than a resolution. Yet for the first time in years, Reed faced uncertainty without the leaden weight of solitude. Whatever dangers the future held would be confronted not alone, but alongside a child who had somehow become the center of his world in mere weeks. A fierce, resilient girl who carried her father's determination and her mother's courage. As Cooper's escort departed through the eastern gate, Reed returned to his vigil by Emma's bedside. Dawn would bring new challenges, new decisions. But for now, in this moment of fragile peace, Reed Maddox allowed himself to hope. Not just for survival, but for the possibility of redemption. Not for the town they'd left behind, but for themselves. The territorial courthouse in Cheyenne stood as a symbol of civilization's gradual conquest over wilderness. An imposing structure of red brick and white columns that would have seemed at home in any eastern city. 2 weeks after their escape from redemption, Reed and Emma climbed its broad steps, accompanied by Marshal Reeves and a fully recovered Saul. Emma wore a new dress purchased in Cheyenne, her hair neatly braided and tied with ribbon. She looked almost like any other child, except for the gravity in her eyes and the slight tension in her shoulders as they entered the imposing building. The territorial hearing was less formal than a full trial, but no less consequential. Judge Patterson presided, his familiar face providing some comfort as Emma was called to testify. She spoke clearly and directly, recounting Clara's abuse, her mother's murder, and Cooper's conspiracy without embellishment or dramatics. When questioned about the events at Dunford Station, Emma hesitated for the first time. Cooper's escape had cast a shadow over their journey to Cheyenne. 4 men dead, including Marshal Reeves's trusted deputy, in what was clearly a well-planned ambush. Cooper himself had vanished, presumably into the protective embrace of his railroad consortium. "I wasn't there when Mr. Cooper escaped," Emma stated truthfully, "but I believe he arranged it beforehand while still in redemption. He seemed too confident of rescue." Reed's own testimony followed, corroborating her account and adding details about the confrontation on the mountain. Sheriff Holden, still recovering at Dunford Station, had provided a written deposition confirming Clara's death and Cooper's confession. The proceedings continued for 3 days, with multiple witnesses including Reverend Benjamin, who had made the difficult journey from redemption despite his injuries. Dr. Wilson's medical records provided irrefutable evidence of Emma's abuse, while Saul's research into Clara's past established a pattern of suspicious deaths and manipulations. On the final day, Judge Patterson delivered his ruling. This court finds compelling evidence of criminal conspiracy, child abuse, and obstruction of justice, he announced, his voice carrying through the packed courtroom. Warrants will be issued for Hank Cooper's arrest on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. He turned his attention to Emma. Regarding the guardianship of Emma Lark, this court has considered the petitions submitted by Reed Maddox, as well as the child's own stated preferences. His expression softened slightly. Miss Lark has demonstrated remarkable resilience and maturity throughout these proceedings. Her wishes deserve serious consideration. Reed held his breath, acutely aware of how much rested on the next words. Beside him, Emma sat perfectly still, her small hands clasped tightly in her lap. Therefore, Patterson continued, I am granting Mr. Maddox's petition for legal guardianship, pending periodic review by territorial authorities to ensure the child's continued welfare. Relief flooded through Reed. Emma's hand found his, squeezing tightly as Patterson concluded the proceedings. Outside the courthouse, standing in the spring sunshine that had finally displaced winter's grip, Reed knelt to Emma's level. Well, he said, it's official now, if you'll still have me as guardian. Emma regarded him seriously. On one condition, she replied, Cicitas, which that you stop calling yourself my guardian and start calling yourself my father. Her voice remained steady, though her eyes revealed vulnerability. If you want to. The request, so simple, yet so profound, left Reed momentarily speechless. He had been prepared for legal responsibility, for the practical aspects of raising a child. But fatherhood, with all its emotional weight and sacred obligation, was something he had believed forever denied to him after Sarah's death. I would be honored, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, though I may not be very good at it at first. That's all right, Emma assured him with surprising gentleness. We'll learn together. As they walked away from the courthouse, joined by Saul, who had respectfully maintained distance during their exchange, Reed felt a sense of completion he'd thought lost forever. The promise made to a dying soldier 20 years ago had led not just to duty fulfilled, but to a future neither of them could have imagined. So, Saul asked as they reached the hotel, Oregon, or somewhere else entirely? Reed looked to Emma, honoring his commitment to include her in such decisions. What do you think? Where should we make our home? Emma considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Somewhere with a school, she decided, and trees and enough land for horses. She glanced at both men, and room for a family that might keep growing. Reed nodded, understanding her meaning. Sheriff Holden had expressed interest in joining their westward journey once he recovered, and Saul, though he valued his independence, had hinted he might settle nearby. Oregon it is, Reed agreed. We'll leave as soon as preparations are complete. As they entered the hotel, Reed noticed Emma touch the locket that still hung around her neck, the tangible connection to parents she'd barely known. But her other hand remained firmly in his, a bridge between past and future. The journey ahead would not be without challenges. Cooper remained at large, his consortium still powerful. The Western Territories held their own dangers and hardships. But for the first time in decades, Reed Maddox faced the future not as an obligation to be endured, but as a promise to be embraced. And beside him walked Emma Lark, no longer just a child he'd sworn to protect, but a daughter he'd come to love. Together they would build something neither had dared hope for, not just shelter, but home, not just survival, but life. In the land of ghosts, they had both found resurrection.